I'd like to call the meeting or the work session to order. The time is 6 o'clock. We have 4 members of council present. First item on the agenda is residential solid waste services request for proposals. Mr. Cobb.
Thank you, Deputy Mayor. Just some housekeeping just before we get started. On the table, there is an email from Councilman Britton. He is stuck at work and may make it, may not make it, but he wanted to give you some insights in his review of the council items. So we want to get that on the table for you tonight. And we found out that the iPads have a problem with track changes in Word. So we also have for you tonight on the table the changes in the other agenda items. As far as the delegation of authority and the order of business, standard operating procedures, and we'll try to get that worked out so that we can send you PDFs that actually show things being changed rather than the final copy. Tonight, this first item, yes, we are in the last year of our residential solid waste program with Republic Services. Our contract is set to expire September 30th of this year, and so we need to go out for a request for proposal. We've been working with Willdan Financial Services. We're attacking this from a financial perspective because we're looking at all the things that we've been hearing over the past few years regarding the cost of waste services, particularly recycling. We wanted to find out, okay, just how's the market out there? What kind of financial impact it is going to have on any type of change that we make to our program. Jeff McGarvey is with us tonight from Willdan. And Jeff has a relationship with MSW Consultants. They specialize in refuge programs just like this. And so they've brought them in, Mr. John Culbertson, who's sitting down here at the end of the table. And they are helping us prepare the RFP. And we want to make sure that we've gotten now to the point where we need your assistance as far as the type of services that we want to request, how we want to structure that, and if there's any services that we want to include, any services we want to exclude. Is it as simple as maintaining exactly what we have now? John has gone through, he's looked at all the different options. And so I'm going to turn it over to John. His PowerPoint, it'll obviously on the screen. We also have it in paper copy as well for you if you want to look at it, follow along. And so I'll turn it over to Mr. Culbertson and let him walk you through the things that he has found through his research. And we'll probably have a number of questions for you at the end. And hopefully what I'd like to walk out of here tonight with is your direction regarding the type of program we want to put out on the street for different vendors to apply, to respond to. And because I believe we have to get it out on the street by the end of this month or early February. So.
Okay.
Slight technical difficulty. Hang on.
Technical difficulty.
It's adjusting. Hold on. There you go.
Very well. I was not even looking at that until it was too late to have that ready for you. Hi, my name is John Culbertson. I appreciate the chance to be here. We have a fair amount to cover, but out of respect for your time, I'm going to try to get through it pretty quickly. I would like to just say a quick word just to follow up on what the city manager said. MSW Consultants, we have worked in association with Willdan for a number of years and had just a good relationship of being, crazy as it sounds, the waste management and recycling experts. Our firm, we look at ourselves as a management consulting firm that happens to focus on the waste and recycling industry. Our client...
If you could you stick this a little closer so everybody can hear? Thanks.
Absolutely. Yeah, thanks for the guidance. MSW Consultants, we specialize in the waste and recycling industry, and we work predominantly for local governments, counties, solid waste authorities. And so we're typically bringing folks from the industry providing some expertise. We do this work in Florida, up and down the East Coast, and across the country. So strange as it sounds, we're actually specialists on this topic, and I appreciate the chance to come and share a little bit about some of the research we've done, some of the analysis we've done, and my hope is that it'll be clear and helpful, and that we'll get some final guidance from you in terms of going forward. So let's see here. I'm going to get this situated, so hopefully I can talk and see what I'm talking about all at the same time. I think the first number of slides are really just for the purpose of some background. I suspect most of you are going to know most of this. As it was mentioned, the residential contract has to be rebid. It's expiring later this year. And so the purpose of this presentation is to get some details on what services and what structure is needed. So let's get with it. I'd like to start with a summary of the program. I think most of this is going to be a little bit of formality. I suspect you probably know most of it. I do want to just call out that the city has an interlocal agreement with Seminole County, and that is important because Seminole County in the state of Florida, counties are responsible for providing solid waste disposal and processing infrastructure. Seminole County offers that. Refuse generated in Oviedo is delivered to Seminole County disposal facilities. Interestingly, Seminole County provides recycling processing, and I'm looking at the bottom bullet now, which I really think is the most important component of this. The hauler currently, Republic, doesn't currently deliver recyclables to Seminole County for processing, and the reason is because Seminole County can only accept dual stream recycling. In other words, Seminole County can only take recyclables if all the cardboard and paper has been separated from all the bottles and cans, whereas in Oviedo, you have a single stream recycling program. That's going to be a recurring theme that we talk about here. And I think an important note, because in looking at options, this is, we're going to come back to recycling, but foreshadowing a little bit, it may be an alternative to revisit dual stream recycling, and the city has confirmed with the county that the county is open to resuming acceptance of city-generated recyclables if they're delivered in a format that Seminole County can handle. So I think that's an important detail just to note with this interlocal agreement. I think this has actually already been mentioned, so I won't spend a whole lot of time on it. Republic Services contract expires in September, end of September this year. There have already been some extensions, but my understanding is that there are no more opportunities to extend, so it's essentially a rebid without any other alternatives, hence the urgency and the interest in this work session. Again, just a quick overview of the services as they are contained in this contract. City of Oviedo residents enjoy cart-based automated collection in a 96-gallon refuse cart. They get that once a week. You'll hear how is service delivered and how frequently. That's what drives pretty much everything in price in the industry. Yard waste, it's a manual collection. You can put it out in bundles, you can put it in bags, you can put it in your own cans. Bulky waste, furniture, white goods, appliances, what have you. There's a monthly limit, and that's a scheduled service. Again, I think these are all pretty straightforward. Recycling, also back dating to 2013, I believe, converted from the old Seminole County dual stream system to the current 96-gallon cart recycling automated system. There's a picture of one of the city's carts. And this is actually about as high a service as you'll see in recycling collection because it's every week. It's a huge volume, 96. It's a big volume cart. Automated collection, very convenient for the resident because residents can mix their bottles and their cans with their cardboard and their paper. So it's kind of historically, up until several years ago, it was widely thought that everybody would just converge on single stream automated collection because it's easy to collect and it's really convenient. So, how things can change. The other detail about the current contract that I think is material, just wanted you to be aware of, it is a fairly common strategy for local governments to include some supplemental services under their residential curbside collection contracts. Oviedo has done this, and so got some background from staff and have listed some of the services. There's essentially a slate of things that the city reserves the right to request its current contract hauler to come and provide these supplemental or so-called free services that we've been calling them and discussing with staff, we've been calling them free services As you know, nothing is free. It just means that the cost of these services have been bundled into the contractual rates that the hauler charges the city, and you can see the list here, what these supplemental services are. Again, pretty common practice among solid waste contracting for local governments. So, in summary, this table is pretty straightforward. It lists your services going down the side, including the supplemental services, but there are 2 points to this slide that I think are important. And the first is that the price that Oviedo pays to Republic right now for the collection of materials from the curb covers the collection cost, that's the truck driving around the neighborhoods, but it also covers the disposal and the processing costs, because once that truck collects, it's got to go somewhere and offload the waste, offload the recycling, offload the yard waste, and have that material either disposed if it's refuse or else processed and recovered if it's recyclables or yard waste. And so the current contract bundles the collection and the processing and the disposal all together in a single number, which is fine. It happens, is fairly common, but it's not as transparent because now you're not totally sure what's the collection component of that cost and what's the disposal and processing component of that cost. It creates a little bit of nebulousness in how that goes. So I think that's an important point. And I think the other point that you should know, you may already know this, is at the conclusion of the current contract, Oviedo will have already paid for both its refuse cart for every resident as well as its recycling cart. Those carts in bulk cost about $55 a pop, so the fact that you already essentially own carts is good. It means you shouldn't be paying for carts in the future. Maybe you're paying for cart maintenance, but that's a much smaller component than new carts. So I think that's good to keep in mind as we look at the city's current position. All right, so I've got 2 slides because coming back to the recycling program and some of the changes we'll get into, I have 2 slides to compare and contrast single-stream recycling with dual-stream recycling. And I do want to say these are not pictures from Oviedo. Apologies, I wasn't quite organized enough to get out and snap one of something going around the city, but I think these are at least representative of what a single-stream recycling program, as you can see on this picture, a single cart with a mix of bottles, cans, cardboard, aluminum, steel, glass, all the different mix of containers. So single stream, you can see it's really efficient. It's a single truck with a single operator. That hydraulic arm typically has a really quick cycle time. Back when the city converted to single stream recycling, the collection efficiencies were compelling and recycling markets were high, and so you made a lot of money on the recyclables in that cart. And kind of interestingly, contamination wasn't as big of a problem. So this was a great system for the city to convert to. Plus those carts increase the volume of recyclables, so you're diverting more stuff. So it had all kinds of benefits on all levels, financial, environmental, increasing recycling. So let me jump over to a dual stream photo. This also is not Seminole County, but it is indicative of a dual stream program. Dual stream recycling usually means that residents sort their cardboard paper all in one container and they put their bottles and their cans in another. Sometimes cities will let residents mix that material in a bin, but then somebody's got to separate the material into 2 different compartments on a truck. So this picture shows a little bit of an old-fashioned manual dual compartment side load truck, and essentially all the containers goes in one of those little compartments. You can see on the right-hand side, all the fiber goes in the other, and those materials stay forever separate in the truck. So it's a less efficient collection method. Those bins are smaller, so households, you put a couple of Tide laundry detergent bottles in that bin and it fills up. If you don't break down your cardboard, those fill up pretty quick. So it's not as convenient for the resident, but it is great for the quality of the recycling. And so we're going to be comparing and contrasting single stream and dual stream. And so Seminole County can take materials in dual stream, which we'll come back to. All right, again, continuing with just deluging you with the facts of the situation, this table summarizes 2 components of the full rate that the city charges its residents as part of a utility bill. And you can see the blocks on the left. There's the amount that the hauler is charging the city. The amount, so that's what the city pays under the current contract. And you can see there are a couple of line items in there. You can see there's a separate cart fee. That's going to go away, but it's still there now. You can see the disposal, which actually includes processing. And then you can see components of collection, which include the equipment operator and the truck operating costs and the annualized capital costs. So the city's paying the hauler $18.40 for all collection, disposal, and processing. That's kind of an all-in number. City writes a check every month for that amount. And then just for informational purposes on top of that, obviously the city has to administer that contract. The city has to, there's essentially granting a right of franchise to that hauler. The city's got to maintain the roads the hauler drives over, so there's a franchise fee. The city's got to do the billing and collections, which is a huge benefit, by the way, to the hauling community to have the city handle that aspect of a contract. So when you add the city's component, we're about $21 a house in terms of the total rate. I need to be very clear because throughout the remainder of the slides I have, I'm focusing only on that contracted component. So the franchise fee and the handling fee, I've sort of taken that $2.63 and set that aside. So the numbers that you'll see as we go forward pertain to the collection, disposal, processing, the contracted amount that the city would pay upon going out to update the RFP. And I'll try to remind you of that as I go forward.
And counsel, if I could, in your memorandum, there's a typo on that. For the 2103, we missed it by about 80 cents. So just wanted to call that to your attention and apologize for that as well.
All right, so very well. So over any time one of these contracts comes due, typically a city has been under contract for many years, and it probably like anything else, markets for collection, recycling, and disposal and processing services change over time, and so we wanted to undertake for everyone's behalf a pretty decent look at what the current market rates are and what likely cost impacts the city might get going out for bid, because we think it does factor into some of the RFP structure. And so I've got some slides that provide a couple of things. Get a little ahead of myself. One is I want to go over disposal and processing costs, because that's one component. Then I want to go over the collection costs. So let's start with what I think is a little bit easier, disposal and processing costs. So I'd like to unbundle what your contract is now, right? It's all bundled together. I'd like to start by unbundling because I think it's informative in thinking about how the system works. And this table shows, it breaks down the services: trash, recycling, yard waste, bulky waste, which is really another form of trash. And it shows the cost per ton to process or dispose of that material. But what you'll see is some of the columns are labeled SS, and some of the columns are labeled DS. SS is single stream, DS is dual stream. So the only row that changes in the table is the recycling row, because you could either go to dual stream processing or single stream processing. And so depending on what that processing cost is, that translates directly into $1 per household. So I think it's just helpful to have this. And the piece of information that's especially noteworthy is how much more expensive single stream processing is compared to dual stream processing. If you look at that very first column, cost per ton for single stream, you'll see a huge range, $95 a ton to $200 a ton. It turns out both of those numbers have been provided to the city by its current contractor over the last 6 months, as they've, some informally, some on a formal email. MSW Consultants, we're currently working for several other cities in Central Florida. The numbers that we're hearing are maybe $100 to $120 a ton processing cost, usually with a rebate coming back in the form of recycling revenue. So candidly, we think it's on the real number is on the lower end of that, but that $100 a ton triple figure processing cost at the current time is what we're seeing for processing single stream material. Conversely, Seminole County and the interlocal agreement that Oviedo has with Seminole County has a much more favorable processing cost. It's much lower. There's a revenue share. And it's frankly, it's easier to process recyclables if they're already split between paper and containers. But I think the takeaway, though, is just to get material disposed, recycled, and ground up into mulch, if it's yard waste, you're looking at somewhere between $3.85 and $8.30 a household per month is probably high, but somewhere between $3.85 and call it $7 a household per month, just to have that material have a home that, where it goes where it needs to go. And so that's an important number, and we use some of these numbers in our analysis, which is why I wanted to break it down this way.
Excuse me. So that would be equivalent to the 337, or is it the 337 plus the diesel and natural gas?
Well, so what's interesting is, if I understand your question right, you've gone back and looked at this disposal line item. This is information provided by Republic. This is not information we have the ability to vet or confirm. What we do have the ability to confirm is how many tons the city generates on a per household basis, and we know what the tip fees are for refuse and yard waste and bulky waste, because that's a Seminole County number, so that those are all known. So we can essentially back into all your disposal and yard waste processing costs. We also can do the same for the dual stream recycling, because that also is coming straight from Seminole County. We are basing the single stream processing cost on just an awareness of the market, as well as communications from the city's hauler to the city. Does that
But
make
is
sense?
this inclusive or exclusive of fuel?
Well, at the processing facility, typically fuel is not extra. Typically, the fuel charge is only associated with the collection portion of that
Okay.
rate. So there really is no fuel associated with disposal and processing.
Perfect, okay.
So, and I think you have identified an interesting element, which is we feel these are very solid numbers, because we have very good information about the generation rate in the city, and we know exactly what the tip fees are. So you can do the math. This is simple math to solve for this. So it is a little bit interesting to, just to see that some of the communications might contradict a little bit, what is going on with that. So,
On the cost of disposal, do those usually stay pretty steady over the course of time?
it turns out here in Seminole County and in Florida, we're pretty fortunate in that disposal has been both low and steady. And that's simply because the counties here in the state and in Central Florida do provide landfills. And once you build a landfill, it's great. It's getting a new one built where the trouble comes in, but that's a whole different work session right there. But disposal costs are very stable. Yard waste processing costs are very stable because you're grinding it and mulching it. It's well known. Recycling, in fact, I'm going to come up here. My next slide actually gives a little background as to why recycling is the outlier in waste management right now. So a couple of reasons. So up until about 2016, over 30% of the recyclables collected on residential curbsides around our country went to a port and got shipped probably to China or another Pacific Rim country. We had a huge export market for recyclables. And at the time, export markets tolerated contamination. In 2017, the Chinese government, for reasons known to the Chinese government, but I think realistically because there was increasing contamination in those recyclables, the Chinese government cut off all imports of essentially curbside recyclables, thereby overnight drying up 33% of a national market for a country the size of the U.S. and including the European Union. So the recycling industry experienced a huge disruption at that time. And what it's basically done is it's made we Americans confront the fact that we've been getting away with contaminating our recyclables for many years and not have to worry about it. Chinese won't take contamination anymore, so to get contamination out is a huge challenge. And you can see some photographs on here, which I think, unfortunately, are more representative than you might imagine on what recyclables look like. And specifically, even just putting simple plastic grocery bags, if you put all your bottles and cans in a grocery bag and put your grocery bag in your recycling cart, those grocery bags wrap around the axles of a lot of the industrial equipment at these recycling facilities and are very expensive and damaging to that equipment. So because of essentially global economic import policies and the need to get rid of contamination, recycling got super expensive overnight. There's also a bit of a scarcity of processing capacity here in Central Florida. Orange County, in its infinite wisdom, several years ago, did not go through with plans to upgrade its recycling facility to be a single-family facility. And Orange County is a huge generator of single-stream recycling. So there's actually a lot of recyclables, single-stream, getting trucked out of Central Florida to more distant single-stream processors right now. There's a capacity issue which creates risk for a city of Oviedo because there is not local infrastructure to process single-stream recycling necessarily. It's a little more constrained. So that covers the processing and disposal component. Let me talk about, now I'm talking about collection, and that is the trucks, the labor, the fuel, annualized capital cost of the trucks, what it takes to drive that vehicle around the neighborhood, pick the material up and deliver it to the facility for processing. And we actually looked at this two ways. One is we researched existing pricing on existing contracts in Seminole and Orange County, which we think is as informative as you're going to get. And I need to predicate everything I'm about to say with nobody that I know can predict exactly what pricing you'll get as part of an RFP competitive process. You can have just unforeseen things. We believe that the Central Florida market's pretty competitive. There are a number of haulers that do business throughout the Central Florida area, so that's a plus. We think this is a reasonable analysis, but I have to say, you never know. The market can be what the market will be, which we'll certainly will know after the RFP. That said, we've researched current pricing, and MSW Consultants also has developed a pro forma model to look at collection systems, which we've used to compare and contrast different recycling collection changes that you might consider that we'll get to. All right, first table with small numbers. I don't know if you can see that. You might want to look at your copy. And essentially what this table shows you are some other cities in Seminole County, as well as Seminole County's unincorporated area contract information, and also Orange County divides its unincorporated area into 5 different service districts. And so we actually were able to get copies of these contracts, read through the terms of the contract to understand what services are included. And so all of the columns on this table, I won't go through them line by line, but essentially you can see that some of the frequency varies. So G is garbage, R is recycling, yard waste, bulky waste. So there's a frequency. You can see for the most part frequencies are pretty common. However, some cities still get twice a week garbage collection. So there's some differences there. Recycling programs, there's a mix of dual stream and single stream. We listed the haulers. Looks like Waste Pro is doing pretty well, but thankfully there are a few others in here that have been able to get some business. I think that keeps competition up. That's good. Really important on the pricing, all of these contracts cover collection. Only those top 3, including the city of Oviedo's, are paying for more than collection, paying for disposal and processing or some component of that. So this pricing, you can see there's a pretty high range. Well, if you just look at the ones that are collection only, the range narrows a little bit. And actually, if you go back to the previous slide, I won't jump to it, but thinking about $4 a ton for disposal processing, well, if you add $4 a ton to these collection-only contracts, what you see is that kind of the all-in pricing is starting to cluster around that $17, $18, $19 a household. And again, we think that's a sign of a pretty competitive marketplace because you do see that pretty narrow clustering. If you had a non-competitive market, you could have dramatic swings for the same service. So I think it's a positive that's a pretty narrow range. And a couple of things to know, again, none of these contracts are perfect apples to apples, so I do need to just caution you. A number of things do vary from contract to contract. I won't read them, but I do think that's very important. As much as we love to hang our hat on these other 3 contracts that are exactly like Oviedo, none of them are exactly like Oviedo. There's just enough differences that there's going to be a little variation. But I think the takeaways from this are that the biggest influences on the price you're going to pay when you go back out for an RFP is whether or not you include disposal and processing in the contract or whether you handle that externally. If you could handle that, for example, directly with Seminole County and not pass it through your hauler. We're going to come back to that.
Let me ask for a point of clarification. On everything but the top 3, is that is how that is handled then? The city directly pays for disposal and processing?
Actually, the top 3, those 3, the city is writing a single check. Yeah, single check to their hauler, and the hauler is then paying for disposal and processing and passing that through, and candidly, probably marking that up a little bit.
But for the other ones, the city would pay directly then?
Correct. So the ones beneath Oviedo are writing a check to their hauler for just the collection portion, and then they've made arrangements with basically Seminole County to pay the county directly based on the tonnage delivered from their city. So they're writing more checks, but they're all getting the same service.
Gotcha.
And honestly, there's probably a little bit of avoiding a markup if they're dealing directly with Seminole County rather than passing it through their hauler contract. Probably not a huge amount. I wouldn't recommend anybody change what they're going to do on account of that, but it's just the way business goes.
On these contracts, do you have a timeline of when these contracts were executed?
That's a good question. We have all that. I do not know off the top of my head, but I can say this is a whole range and that the pricing, similar to the city of Oviedo, every year you'll get a letter potentially requesting a rate adjustment. Most of these contracts have an annual escalation clause. So once a year, the hauler approaches the community and says, hey, it's, a year has passed, and pursuant to the Consumer Price Index, we're requesting a rate increase of 2.03%, and they show the math, and it's kind of a done deal. But these are all current prices. We've actually requested current pricing so we can see how this escalation goes.
For those of those cities who pay for disposal, that amount can go up and down on a monthly basis.
Actually, no. So, well, it can if you're going to a private facility.
Okay.
It turns out because here in Seminole County, because the county is the provider of the disposal capacity through their transfer station and landfill, your interlocal agreement is going to dictate the terms of that, and that's been very level. Certainly the county retains the ability to adjust that, but I think Seminole County, like most counties in Florida, are really trying to levelize that and to control those expenses. It's actually, I think it's potentially a very positive
So
that you're not relying on a private facility.
you can have 3 tons more or 3 tons less on a monthly basis, but that price is going to stay the same.
Well, just to make sure I'm clear, the price is going to be on a dollar per ton basis.
Right.
So if you deliver 3 tons more, you're going to pay that dollar per ton times 3 more tons.
Okay.
So I guess the risk is if you have major fluctuations in your generation rate, which typically you don't see on the residential sector. And I guess really the biggest risk here in Florida is, a hurricane-type disaster event, and that tends to be covered separately from your residential collection contract. So we haven't, thankfully, seen a lot of big fluctuations on the residential generation side. So the last point I want to make on this slide, when we talk about how we did our analysis, and going back to the market research, we also used our analytical capabilities and modeled the service levels in Oviedo. And candidly, our model very much supported what we found in the market research. And again, that's just, I can't claim these are perfect, and we might not be a little bit off, but it's comforting when we can duplicate pricing analytically based on what we know to be routes and service days and drive times and fuel costs. We essentially were able to say, hey, this is a pretty reasonable number that collection only costs. We've used $15 a household for collection only, and then if you go back to that disposal table, you got to add $4, some amount of processing on top of that to get your all-in. What city's got to write a check for 19, whatever the number is. And I'm actually going to show you what the numbers are because that's the whole point of this coming up. So that brings us to why we're before you today. Why are we even coming to you to talk about alternatives to recycling? Well, because single stream, we know the price is going to go up, potentially significantly, and I want to share that with you. So let me talk about what impacts the cost of recycling and what we looked at. So there are 2 major drivers of the cost of your recycling program, and the first is the frequency. Right now, everybody gets weekly recycling. Quite a number of cities, not so much in Florida, but nationally, quite a number of cities have reduced the frequency of recycling from weekly to every other week. And the reason they do that is because a 96-gallon cart is an enormous amount of volume, and if people break their boxes down, studies show that the majority of residential households actually can wait 2 weeks to fill up their cart. Now, if you're a super recycler, I think there is some debate on that, but it is not uncommon here in the U.S. abroad, less common in Florida, but it's not uncommon to have every other week recycling. And so we looked at weekly versus every other week. That's one of the things that we varied in our analysis just to test what's the impact on the overall price, going from weekly to every other week. And I'm only talking recycling. We're not changing garbage. We're not changing yard waste. We're not changing bulky waste. This is only recycling. The second thing that has an impact on price is whether it's a single stream or dual stream, because the collection technology and the size of the crew and the efficiency of the collection operation varies. Single stream automated, there's a single operator with a hydraulic arm going really fast. If it's dual stream, there are lots of different ways to do it. And the other thing about dual stream that is, I think, really important for you to know, which I'm sure, if you think about it, in fact, I think I've got some pictures here, is what does dual stream look like for your customer? Well, we saw what single stream looks like. Everybody has a beautiful cart. It's really clean. You can wheel it. It fits in a little corner in your garage. Awesome. Dual stream systems this is what Oviedo had back before 2013. Dual stream systems, now you've got 2 containers, one holding cardboard and paper, the other holding bottles and cans. And that gives you 3 combinations. You can do 2 bins. That's the bottom left. We don't think Oviedo is going to go back in time. We don't think you're going to get rid of your carts, right? So we cross that one out. But you could take your current recycling cart and make it cardboard and paper. And we have Amazon Prime. We got people ordering cardboard boxes left and right. There's a lot of cardboard in the residential recycling stream. So you take your cart, make that your paper and fiber, newspaper, magazines, junk mail, cereal boxes, and then you give everybody a bin. So that would be the picture on the right, would be an example of a dual stream system with a cart and a bin. Or you could go ahead and go crazy, all out, provide yet a 3rd cart, and now everyone's going to have a refuse cart, 1 cart for their cardboard and paper, and another cart for their bottles and cans. So these are all things these all exist, by the way. Don't know if they're right for Oviedo, but these are things that we looked at and thought about. And just real quick, the good news is that the hauling industry and the equipment vendor industry have figured out trucks to handle all these different combinations. So there are dual compartment trucks with tippers and manual loading hoppers and baffles so that you can tilt 1 cart and have all the paper go in 1 compartment, and then you scoot forward and automated lift the other cart. So the good news is there is equipment. Maybe not every hauler uses this all over the place, but all of the major haulers in this area certainly have the capability to leverage the best equipment. So I did want to point that out. It's not a lost cause going back to dual stream. And so now, for those of you who don't like kind of detailed numbers, I'm going to apologize in advance. We decided we'd give you the detailed numbers for those of you who like that, but we also decided we would summarize with a bar chart for those of you who just like the visual. We looked at, 5 options. So we've got status quo, we've got 1 option that's different that would be reducing single stream, and then we've got 4 dual stream options that we looked at when just trying to get a sense of what things might look like with this RFP. And so let me just go across the top row, because your status quo, refuse, so nothing's ever going to change on refuse, right? That stays the same no matter what. But recycling, the container type, the collection frequency, and who gets the material is what changes from scenario to scenario, from option to option. And so what I would call out is the element highlighted in red is what has changed from the status quo. So status quo light, everybody keeps their carts, everybody keeps single stream, but you would reduce frequency from weekly to every other week. So EOW stands for every other week. So that's that first option, status quo light. If you like single stream, but it's too expensive, you could keep your single stream, keep your single cart, and you could save money by reducing the collection frequency. So that would be one possible way to go. And candidly, by the way, I want to be clear, I have no intention of suggesting any of these are better than the others. And if I come across that way, I apologize. I'm really here just to let you all know, hey, what the options are and what we think the cost and operating impacts are. You know your constituency, and you know what is most likely to be accepted. And I think my goal is to just help everybody understand that. The bottom 4 rows are different flavors of dual stream collection. So if Oviedo goes back to dual stream, it's most likely that means your material is going to go back to the county, although there actually are a couple of processors that are a little further away from the county that would take it. But the county has already indicated they would take Oviedo dual stream material. But the alternatives we looked at are just, is it 2 carts or is it a cart and a bin, and what's the frequency of collection? And the only one that I'll just touch on ever so briefly is the dual stream option C, which is 2 carts. That would actually have the fiber cart lifted 1 week and the next week containers. So you would get weekly collection, but you'd alternate whether you set out paper or containers. And so that option keeps the same level of collection, but it's obviously more, all the dual stream is more complicated for the residents. Residents have to do more and pay more attention to function effectively in the dual stream system. So I've got some numbers, but honestly, if you don't want to look at any of the numbers on this table, look at the far right column, because I've just tried to show what we are projecting would be price impacts compared to the current contract price of $18.40. Again, setting aside the franchise fee and the city handling fee, this is the total cost of collection, disposal, processing of all the materials. And so, again, we've actually broken out the components of that cost, for those of you that care to do a deep dive. But at the end of the day, if Oviedo stays single stream, you could just about hope to get as comparable prices you have today, but you'd have to go to every other week. And you'll note that these rows are labeled low processing cost, high processing cost. Low processing cost assumes you get $95 to $100 a ton. High processing cost is $200 a ton. So there's also inherent a risk, because we really don't know what single stream processing cost Oviedo might get as a part of this, the outcome of this RFP. We just don't know. We think it's going to be over $100. We don't think it's going to be $200, but could it be $125? It's possible. And so hence the low processing cost, high processing cost. But at the end of the day, staying with the status quo with single stream recycling, somewhere between, and not changing frequency, somewhere between a 14 and a 29% increase to the overall rates, just given current market conditions. That's kind of our estimate on that. Conversely, let me go to dual stream. Again, more numbers than it. I don't expect anybody to digest this. There will be no pop quiz, other than the right-hand side, the column that summarizes the change from current price. And this is really what's kind of interesting is, especially dual stream column C, where you would give everybody another recycling cart, and then you alternate pulling those carts every week, so fiber containers. You, in theory, could maintain the same level of service. You could maintain carts and automated collection, although now everybody has 2 recycling carts, with a fairly modest projected increase of about 6%. And again, if budget and cost were a huge issue and convenience is less of an issue, you actually could go to an every other week dual stream and maybe even keep your rates similar. I would never advocate reducing your rates, to be honest, but essentially, even though it's a little more expensive to collect some of the dual stream material, the offset for the low processing essentially makes up for that. But let me put all this together, because this graph is really where we put all the options side by side, for those of you that prefer the more visual look. The dotted green line shows your current rate. There's a little bit of code word at the bottom of each of these bars, but if you just to real quickly touch on them, DS dual stream, SS single stream, you'll see the every other week or status quo. So status quo means weekly. Every other week means change in the frequency. And you can kind of see, now I'll call your attention to the 2 blue bars. The 2 blue bars, those are the 2 single stream options that maintain weekly collection. In other words, those are your 2 status quo. And if processing, one of the vendors has access to capacity for processing, you get a really good rate for processing, then that would be the lower blue bar. So that's $20, $21 a household is kind of our projection on that. If processing costs kind of skyrocket up, high hundreds, that far right bar. And so really this shows that, number one, it shows the magnitude. It's not like your rate's going to double. It's not going to go from $18 to $36 on account of recycling. But it's certainly more than a 3 or 5%, prospectively more than a 3 to 5% increase. So just wanted to kind of set expectations on that with this rebid. And again, you can see my cautionary note at the bottom. The market will decide. I would love to tell you we have 100% accuracy. I think we're trying to not be so far off that we're all surprised, because that wouldn't look good for any of us, especially me. So I think we feel pretty good about the magnitude, but you could see something come in a little higher than these. I mean, it's possible. You just don't know. I actually think what you have going for you is that Oviedo has a small enough volume that you're not going to suddenly overwhelm the market. Orange County is a different story, which is why Orange County is having a little bit of a struggle with recycling right now. So I've just laid a lot of background on you, showed a lot of pictures, talked a lot of data. I'd like to conclude with some recommendations that we have. We try to come up with what we think are good options, but we really love the chance to present them to you and to get your feedback on, hey, is this appropriate? Should we even go there? And just to look ahead, I've talked a lot about dual stream recycling. That's probably the very biggest one. But let me hit these in order, because I kind of build up to the recycling options. And some of these I think are easier than others. But the recommendations we have that we would be delighted to get feedback, confirmation, revisions, questions, what have you. I'll just go through these. I think they're pretty important. Recommendation number 1 is when we go out for RFP, we would recommend that we structure it so that bidders can propose to only process, can propose to only collect, or can bundle. And what might happen on that is we would love to get some bids from processors and some bids from collection entities so that we have that transparent pricing and can orchestrate the best combination of collection and processing. It also creates transparency in the management of that contract. The city knows what services it's getting and how much it's paying for each component of the service. But you also could just say, you know what, we don't care about that. We're going to stick with bundled pricing. So we actually think that if we do the RFP correctly, we recommend breaking those down for those reasons. The second recommendation we have is that we are not looking to change refuse collection, any component of it. We're not looking to change yard waste. We're not looking to change bulky waste. That may sound easy and trivial, but that's frankly really important. And so recommendations for no changes to those. We don't think we've heard anything about concerns on any of those services. And the bottom recommendation, actually, I participated in a number of conversations with staff talking about some of the issues with bears coming into the city and bear carts and bear straps. We recommend that not be addressed in this RFP. And the main reason is because as long as we put a sentence in the RFP that says the city of Oviedo reserves the right to supply some sort of bear protective carts or straps, as long as the vendors know that and whatever the city does is compatible with the collection component, the city can handle that issue completely external to this RFP. It's not necessary to be included, and unless you have an extensive bear problem, it's more of a spot issue. The recommendation is to not bring bear carts or bear prevention into the RFP process. All right, so to me, those were just more perfunctory recommendations, but really the guidance that we would love to get from you really involves recycling. I just spent a lot of time talking about, hey, stay the course on single stream, your prices are going to go up. Maybe from 1840 to 24, 25, it's a fairly significant price increase. Should we stay the course or should we go elsewhere? Well, our recommendation is we think as long as we don't deluge the market with 25 different options, if we limit a smaller number of alternatives, we are recommending that when we do this RFP, we ask vendors to give us pricing for 4 different alternatives. Alternative 1 is the status quo, exactly what you're doing now with recycling, weekly cart-based single stream. Option number 2 is keep single stream but reduces to every other week. We would expect the bid prices for that to be lower because it's a lower level of effort. So we've got 2 single stream options that we would include. We also have 2 dual stream options that we're recommending be included that we seek pricing from the hauling community. And option number 3 is go to dual stream and provide a second cart. So now you have 2 recycling carts, and there would be alternating paper, container paper. It would be alternating collections. So that's pretty complicated for residents, but that would be keeping weekly collection and the lowest cost for dual stream. And if you really want a low cost, like the super low cost would be option 4. So that would be providing a bin rather than a cart. Bins are a lot cheaper compared to carts. So option 4 would be like the lowest cost option if for whatever reason going super budget is something that you want to look at. But the recommendation is to not go with any more than 4 options. We could probably structure a whole bunch more, but I think our recommendation is not to overdo it. But these are the 4 that seem the most likely, and we would welcome feedback. Do we test single stream and dual stream, or candidly, I guess maybe I've speculated. Maybe you decide, hey, we already know that dual stream might not work. But again, that's looking for feedback on what to include in the RFP. And remember, if we include that, there's really no risk to include these in the RFP. We think the vendors will bid on these. We think they'll give some pricing on these options, and it really preserves flexibility that you have to see and compare how you want to go when the bids come back in as part of the RFP process. So I think at this point, we think it's reasonable, low risk, and potentially very informative to see what the market is saying about these different alternatives. And the last slide of recommendations I have not yet mentioned glass, but so it turns out glass is about 20 to 25% by weight of all the recycling that we put out. And as soon as you mix glass together in single-stream recycling, and it's not separated by color, it's all broken in all mixed colors, it actually has a negative value. It also, broken glass, so in other words, if I recover glass from a single-stream processor, I have to pay money to get it to go to a recycling plant. It's not like I'm making money on that glass. I sort it, I separate it, now I have to pay. I don't pay, it's not as much as disposing of it, but I'm still paying money. So it's a net cost to move your glass. The other thing is glass contaminates paper. You think about how glass breaks and it sticks to, it gets in the newspaper, the cardboard, so paper mills don't like it. It grinds through equipment. The MRFs don't like it because it beats up their conveyor belts, everything else. So there are communities, I want to say I did just see one in Florida, but for the life of me, I can't pull it out. But certainly around the country, a number of areas of the country are starting to drop glass, or maybe even when they went single stream, never even included glass. We think it would be possible to allow respondents to give maybe a pricing or some kind of discount or some kind of feedback on, well, if Oviedo took glass out of its curbside program, it would have an impact on pricing. Candidly, we don't think that's going to really move the needle a whole lot. It's not like you still got to drive that truck around, you still got to lift the carts, you got to do all the fuel, all the labor. Your processing picture probably gets a little better. The material's a little more valuable, but your recycling rate goes down and your disposal rate goes up because now all that glass goes from the recycling bin over to the trash bin, and now you're paying $33 a ton to dispose of it. So we don't think that's a huge impact, but it might be worth checking. So we actually recommend that might be worth testing. And then the last recommendation we have, you'll recall earlier on in the presentation, talking about the supplemental services, community events, public works building, pickup. Perfectly acceptable to include that in the contract. Our recommendation is that we actually line those out and quantify those services and request line item pricing for those supplemental services. And again, that just goes back to transparency and contract management, just a best practice. You could decide to then bundle that back into your residential pricing, but from a management standpoint, we would recommend separating those line items. So if you're still with me, God bless you, because there's covered a lot of ground on that.
Could I ask a quick question?
Yes, ma'am.
On the tipping fees, my understanding from talking with our current provider is that it costs more to tip at a recycling facility, to tip the glass at a recycling facility than it does at the dump. So that would cost us, well, I guess it wouldn't cost us more under our current contract because they hook it all together, but it could potentially cost us more if we were to do as you suggest, or as I think you're suggesting, and evaluate those separately. Am I understanding that correctly?
Yeah, that is correct. And just to be very candid, somewhat counterintuitively, I mean, for years in this country, I think the recycling industry has done a bit of an injustice saying, oh, it's great, it's free, it's going to make money. Well, the reality is it costs money to have a recycling program. And if you have glass in your recycling program, it costs money for the processor to sort it, and then the processor has to pay money to move it. So just in very blunt terms, glass going to Seminole County, it's probably $25 a ton processing cost because dual stream programs are lower processing. If it goes to that single stream program, you're paying $100 a ton to process your glass. If you shift that over to your refuse, now you're paying $33 a ton to dispose of it in the landfill. So you don't get the environmental benefit, you lose that as a reusable material. But candidly, glass is inert. If you're going to put a material in a landfill that's never going to harm the environment, glass is a great candidate. So again, just kind of things to think about. So in a state that is made of sand, which is the key ingredient to make glass, it's hard to get a lot of value for glass. That's been just an economic reality for glass recycling and recovery.
Can I ask a question? I'm going to try and phrase it properly. I went to a seminar last August given by the county recycle program, and they were concerned because a lot of the recycle, for instance, cardboard boxes were contaminated. Mm-hmm. And she indicated to us that, say, a pizza box, mm-hmm. even if it has a little bit of grease on it, it's considered contaminated, so not appropriate for recycling. Mm-hmm. So my concern is just where are we going with the recycling program if they are accepting fewer and fewer things? One of the things that she indicated, and again, I was completely ignorant, the plastic that you get from restaurants and things like that, or vegetables, the plastic that those come in, and it has a recycling symbol on the back, but they're considered single use and therefore not appropriate for recycling. So, given your wonderful presentation about recycling, my concern is that it's not, what are we gaining from this?
Right.
If less and less materials are able to be recycled.
Yeah, I think that's a fair question, and I think one thing that the industry has learned over the past 2 decades, it's actually remarkable how much the waste stream has changed. 5 to 7 years ago, there was very little cardboard in the residential stream, and now we have Amazon Prime and we have competing delivery services, and I mean, you get overwhelmed by little boxes. I mean, I don't know about your household, I'm sure it's not every household, but I will tell you, my household is a proud adopter of the Amazon Prime program, as are many, many residential households. So we've seen, and cardboard has value. Things that, aluminum always had value, steel cans usually always had not a huge positive value. Plastic narrow neck bottles, believe it or not, this is a narrow neck bottle. Really, the plastic recyclers want bottles with a narrow neck. They don't want the clamshells, and they don't want the straws and the silverware and the little stuff. They want bottles because automated equipment can find this. It's 3-dimensional. Automated equipment can sort that. And it turns out most plastic bottles are one of 2 resins, PET or HDPE. Recycling, it's a game of volume. If you can get a large volume of the same stuff, you can recycle it. So that's why the recycling industry is really going back to basics. They want materials that you can get a large volume of and keep them clean and separate them easily with automated sorting technologies. So there are magnets, there are eddy currents, there are optical sorters that examine the resin and shoot bursts of air to kick the different plastic into the different resin types. And I think what we're seeing is just a retrenchment of focusing on those materials. I am actually, I'm a recycling consultant. I happen to believe that recycling is a positive. I'm proud to say that. Wouldn't be in this industry if I didn't. And I would tell you that it's been satisfying that we have not seen a wholesale dropping of recycling programs in this country. The last data I saw in the entire country, we've got 3,000 counties and 25,000 incorporated cities. The last statistic I saw, about 60 communities had dropped recycling on account of this market downturn. I'll take that, right? I think that's a plus. So, and especially at the county level, and especially with some of the state of Florida recycling goals, the legislature, has still hung its hat on a goal, aspirational goal of 75% recycling, and we have not seen wholesale dropping of recycling. I want to say, I'm not going to mention the name because I'll get it wrong, and then I'll rue the day that I misspoke, but we have seen in Florida, at least one community has dropped. But really, we've seen local governments staying the course. And I think if you look at the life cycle economics of recyclables, even though it's a little more expensive, not having to go pump more oil and, develop virgin resin from oil is, if you can get recycled material, that's got a life cycle benefit to it, which I could bore you with way more numbers with that. I won't do that to you. It's too late. But the long-winded answer, we believe that recycling is here to stay and that there are enough desirable, valuable materials that we think we're going to weather the storm. And I mentioned that the part of this whole issue we're having is because of the global economy. When China and other Pacific Rim countries cut off imports, that essentially has caused the U.S. and North America and Europe to get their house in order. What we're starting to see is domestic paper mill capacity is starting to come online. You can't just go build a paper mill in 3 months. That's a couple-year process to get that mill capacity. So current thought is we're 18 to 24 months away to finally having some relief really to this global issue, because that's how long it's taken from the time of the disruption to start growing our domestic capacity to handle recycling. So we actually do think that if you clean up the stream and give us another 18 to 24 months, we do think that recycling is going to come back to a little bit healthier place. It might never reach the peak of 2011, 2012 when a ton of single stream recycling is worth about $150 a ton. Now it's probably worth $45 a ton. So that's a huge swing in what recyclables are worth.
I guess my concern also is that, okay, we're in here and we're pretty knowledgeable about recycling. I consider myself, I thought I was until I went to that presentation. But our residents may not be as knowledgeable and know what is required or what can be recycled. And I guess that's my concern. I don't know how you bridge that gap where the residents are educated enough to know what to recycle so that we aren't just kind of wasting our time and twiddling our thumbs here. Because this is a big expense. And I'll just say my concern is, I don't want to be at the point where we're paying for something that,
It's pretend. Pretend recycling.
Well, you're right. Thank you.
Yeah, they actually call it wish cycling.
Well, yeah. And so again, that's, okay, if we could use, well, anyway, I'll just voice that concern, that I guess I'm concerned that maybe things won't come back online like with China, and also the education for the residents. The residents, they're the ones who are going to be, we're going to rely on to give us what we need in order to be able to recycle properly. But if they don't know, then how can they do it? And then they're giving us stuff that's going to make us do more work. This is going to cost more money. Sure. Their bills are going to go up. So that's my concern.
So let me say, you have just hit the crux of the industry right now. That is the single biggest issue in the recycling industry, is how do you get the behavior you need of individual residents to behave properly and set out only what's recyclable. It turns out there is a lot of funding coming into the recycling space right now from corporate America, from the bottle and can manufacturers and packagers and food and beverage packagers, because frankly they want recycling to work. I don't know that I can answer that question exactly, but we have kind of our sense of where that's going. There is an extensive effort right now of cart tagging programs going on around the country that are funded by grants. It wouldn't surprise me if you went to a presentation in Seminole County that they may have wind of that. Orange County has actually secured quite a large grant to deploy crews around the county to look in carts and to leave informational, educational tags on carts that, hey, if they're plastic bags or pizza boxes, you're going to get a tag, an oops tag. Oops, don't do this again. And if you get multiple weeks in a row of problematic recycling, then that's going to create a decision for a government to make, which is, do you slap that resident on the wrist, or you just take that card away? And our professional opinion is that if you look at the statistics, 10 to 15% of the people will do anything you tell them. You could give them a 2-page book on how to recycle. They'd read it and they'd do exactly what you want. The majority of people will do it if it's easy. So they'll put their boxes in their bottles. They'll do it if it's easy.
Yes.
20% of the people don't care, don't pay attention. You can educate them all you want, and I'm generalizing here. I don't know what the mix is for Oviedo, but the studies across multiple demographic groups, multiple regions of the country, show that there's about 20% problem children who won't come up to where you need them to be. Our professional opinion is, at some point, successful recycling programs may have to have a policy that allows those recycling carts from non-conforming residents to be taken away, and those residents just get the refuse service, and they pay the full rate, but they lose their recycling privileges.
That's brilliant. Can we do that? Why haven't we done that before? Because there are people who they don't want to, and they put trash in both. That's exactly right. I guess that's on our end.
Well, I will tell you, that's so interesting. It's so interesting to me to hear you say that, because historically, that's the public works departments come from, hey, we want a beautiful city. We're going to take everything off the curb because we want a beautiful city, right? That's been the historic mentality. Well, that's not what recycling is. We're going to provide a feedstock to a manufacturing industry. And those manufacturing industries want their specs. They got to meet their specifications. So it's not the same service as traditional garbage collection. Again, that's just our kind of professional opinion, because we think the data shows that 20% of the people, it doesn't matter what you do, 20% of the people aren't going to behave. So at that point, it creates a kind of a policy decision for elected officials and for service bureaus. What do we do with non-conforming behavior? And we just think that if you want a healthy recycling program, that, to us, appears to be a logical outcome. It hasn't happened widely yet. In fact, you have to go out to the West Coast to get more aggressive enforcement. There are some municipalities, City of Seattle is a big one that you'll read about in the press, that will impose fines. If they find contamination, they can impose a fine. So there's some financial, fine situations. But at the end of the day, you can fine somebody one week. If you don't go back the next week, they're just going to contaminate again. So we kind of think that it's going to be really interesting. But that question is right on. That's the dynamic that the whole industry is facing right now. That is not a solved question yet. But clean recyclables is the way to go. I think there is broad consensus that if we're going to have recycling in this country, we've got to commit to doing it the right way and doing it clean. And if people aren't on board with that, then those people can't really be recycling because they're bringing the program down for everybody else.
And costing money.
Absolutely.
I guess that's the thing.
Absolutely.
I want to keep it simple. I want there to be recycling, but we have to face some, I think, hard decisions. So.
Absolutely.
One of the things we have to do is education process, both on our side, and one thing we can write into the RFP is actually to have the prospective contractor actually assist with education. I mean, that's something that Republic has helped us with, as part of their contract. They've been good about that and assisting whenever necessary, and it's something that we can also add and make sure whoever is the next provider can help us as well.
Right.
Okay, so for the sake of time, so it looks like you're looking for the recommendations for the RFP and basically all the recommendations for the RFP, whether we want to go with this or go with something different, correct?
Yeah, that's correct. I think if there's anything here that jumped out at you as no, we definitely don't want that, or yes, we definitely do, that we can just keep it or strike it, that's great. I guess to me, honestly, the biggest issue is, is there an interest to look at going to dual stream? Because that's going to be
Yes.
a backwards convenience, but it's going to get you the cleaner recyclables potentially. So I think that was maybe that's just my personal professional interest is whether dual stream is in place. Certainly from a cost perspective, it's worth looking at.
Okay.
But again, don't want to impose my professional interest on what works for Oviedo. I mean, that's really what works the best for Oviedo. What's going to give you and staff the most flexibility to structure the right program given current market conditions. So we've tried to make recommendations that preserve your ability to evaluate those options when we get to the end of the RFP line. And we are going to have to hustle, by the way, on this RFP. We don't have a whole lot of time. So
Okay, so
slide.
all right, so I think the easiest way to do this is kind of go down and kind of go through anybody's comments. What I will do is Councilman Britton did leave us some notes, so I'll read the notes that he put just for the record. For the solid waste RFP, Councilman Britton did suggest that we issue an RFP for status quo levels of service and require a cost breakdown for each service component. Allow bidders to propose alternatives to each service component for use in best value comparisons of proposals. So that's what he had stated. Councilman Chudnow?
As far as the recommendations go, I do like the three recommendations about bidders provide a different combination of services, to break it down between processing, collection only, and the bundle, because I think that does give you an idea on how much, and that also gives the option to look at a collection only and processing differently.
Absolutely.
And then no change on the refuse, yard waste or bulky waste. I would have to agree with you on the bear carts, because that's something it's going to be difficult to tie that into the RFP. The only option, as far as the recycling options, for me, the dual system, 2 carts, one week, one the next week, I can tell you right now, that's not going to work. Because you're going to have to keep a pretty good calendar to figure which week which one goes out. But I do like the idea of getting those quotes on the RFP for the other options.
Very well. Thank you.
Okay.
Just if I could, on the bear and the bear carts and external RFP. What we've been discussing with John is doing a completely separate bid
Okay.
for the carts. Now that we've found multiple cart producers, that we could go do a bid process for the carts, try to get the lowest price, and then if a resident chooses that they would like to have a cart, then we have a mechanism for them to go and purchase the cart, or we can work a way for them to pay for it through through their bill. We can, put an added charge on their bill for that. And so it would be a personal choice rather than the city dictating. And so that's when John first mentioned that, we realized, like, hey, now that's something that'd be a good idea. Rather than putting the onus onto the hauler, then we would go and try to assist in finding the lowest price. And then, because I know we've had some HOAs express interest and stuff, and so if we go out and we say, okay, we found this low price, then it may enable them to go and make that personal choice if they want to do it or not, and keep it voluntary and specific to that family and how their safety and security, how they want to work. So.
Okay. All right.
I guess if I could add just briefly to what the city manager just said, the good news is that, again, the vending community is great, so the bear carts that the city could deal with externally are compatible with the automated side load system. So in other words, that's why it's such a clean way to let the city handle that in its own time and not kind of gum up this RFP. The compatibility is very high, and as long as we disclose in the collection RFP that the city might unilaterally start swapping out bear carts, that it should just take bear carts out of the equation and keep it really simple.
All right.
Can I just clarify real quick, Councilman, did you say to no to any form of dual stream?
No, I just said the only one that I don't think would work
The alternative.
is the 2 carts, right? The alternate.
The
It was
alternate
3,
week.
yeah.
Right, the alternate week for the different types of recycling.
What about the every other week?
I'd have no problem with the other every week, but again, for some with 3 or 4 kids, that might be difficult when you only have 2 people in the house. Yeah, you can go 3 weeks without filling up that recycle bin. So,
Let the record show that Councilman Britton's here. Councilman Britton, I did read. We're still on the solid waste RFP. I read your notes from your email.
I read the presentation, I think they said in 3 sentences what they said in 34 charts.
Very well could be.
I don't know if you had anything else to add to your notes. Or, okay. Councilwoman Smith?
All right. I don't know what page, but the recommendations that you've made, the 4 alternatives, I'd like to see what the cost of those are. I particularly like the every other week for the recycle in particular, but I would like to see what the cost for all of those would be, or have them included if it doesn't come up the works.
All right.
Great, thank you.
All right. Mayor Slater?
I kind of love the every other week every week alternating cards for the reason you brought up, which is people do not do it right. If you don't get to put out your paper except every 2 weeks, you're going to stop putting your pizza boxes in it. And if you've got to have all your junk sit, not junk, but same thing for the metal or plastic or whatever. That'll give people enough time to do it the right way, or it's going to smell. So I think there is some psychology potentially involved there. So I'd love to see that included. And also maybe a little note about the hauler considering unhooking bear clips. Because if somebody doesn't want to do a bear can, an official bear can, but they just want to do the clips and they forget to do them, well, if they forget every time, that's problematic, and we may need to have some external solution to that. But if they, every once in a while, there's some kind of grace period for they'll top out and undo the clips.
Good, thank you.
Okay. All right. So one of the ones I didn't see here, I saw the status quo, but I didn't see if we went to dual stream but had collection every week. I didn't see that one on here because I'm used to on a certain day, bringing my garbage out, and for someone, for my family at least, will be, was it this week? Is it next week? Now it's a holiday. What do I do? I think that, doing it every week, if the cost isn't, significantly more, I think that would be, would be fine. I understand the need for dual stream with a bin and then the cart, for the reasons that you presented. But I think that we should look at doing, one of the options being every week.
Okay.
For the, and I don't think that was any one.
Actually, it's interesting. I appreciate you mentioning that. We did actually look at that, and if I make the arrow pop back up again, where did you go?
Is that the cart
Oh,
bin,
it's the
second
one-
to
the
right?
second to-
Yeah, it's the second to the right. So we did look at that analytically, and the reason we didn't include that in our recommendations is because, if you think about collecting dual stream with a cart and a bin, that's a specialized piece of equipment. There's 2 lifts instead of 1, so the collection cost is higher. So the reason we didn't include that in recommendations is because we see that as the cost going up. And so I guess, again, just maybe our bias is to want to err towards minimizing rate impacts. So we just didn't include that among our options to check out because it's likely that's also going to be a somewhat meaningful price increase. Because in order to get both streams weekly, you need 2 truck compartments and a slower form of collection, or if it's in carts, you got to actually run 2 separate, you got to run overlapping routes to do it weekly. So we did look at it. We think it actually is like the second most expensive after just staying. Really, if you were to do that, it's not that much of a savings over just status quo. So that was why that didn't make our recommendations based on our analysis that you're going to see fairly similar pricing to a weekly dual stream where you're taking all the containers and all the paper every week just because of the collection inefficiencies. So it's something to think about. We could probably throw a 5th one on there. I mean, if that is something you really want to see, we could do it. Our suspicion is that it's going to be on the price increase side, kind of along the line of status quo single stream.
Okay. All right. And then, I like the idea with the bear carts, kind of keeping them separate. But I just want to make sure that when you write the RFP, that the hauler knows that there's not I just want to make sure that there's not going to be a price increase from the hauler side.
Yeah, absolutely.
Whether it be unclipping or using the bear-proof cans if someone chooses to purchase one of those, that the hauling fee would be the same.
Just a quick comment on that. That makes sense. And the hauling community, I think, if it were possible to quantify how many clips might get in service over the contract, and it was a very small number, just based on other procurements and contracts, we think that could just be kind of a non-issue. But at the end of the day, collection time is money. So anytime something different has to happen that slows that truck down to unclip, empty, and reclip, that time for that customer starts. If there's the more that grows, the more your vendor's going to push back on just tucking that in for the same price. Mm-hmm. So I do think, and this again, maybe I'm just thinking out loud. We might internally want to just talk about what is the potential for that form of bear prevention to come into the city. If it's little, I think what you're suggesting, probably not an issue. If somehow those straps get popular because they're cheap, but start to have a time impact, you will have your vendor coming to you saying, hey, we didn't expect 2,000 bear straps in use, and it's taken us 20% longer. We got to add a route. I got to raise my rates.
And with the straps, I mean, they're supposed to be unstrapped, and when they go to the curb, so it would be the ones the people that forget, and they wouldn't have to strap them back up afterwards because
there's nothing in there.
There's nothing in for the bear.
Right.
So, but I just want to kind of add those, just to make sure that the hauling fee isn't going to be different for that. I'm okay with not putting the every week recycling collection in there if it's going to be pretty close to the status quo. So I'm okay with the recommendations that are here. I'm not a huge fan of the, the paper 1 week and then that one. I mean, so you could almost, for me, you could almost limit it to 3 because I think the alternating ones are going to make it really difficult.
Whichever one is the most full, that's the one you probably put out. Like after you get going, you kind of,
Well,
you'll have a pattern.
Sorry, we got the floor.
Mr. Chairman.
All right.
Mr. Chairman, I don't know, we don't have to discuss this now, but in terms of bear prevention and all the bear cars, there are some, I think, simpler alternatives to all of that I have not heard discussed in any venue, and so perhaps we need to explore that simple, just something very simple that people can do, and so maybe at a later date we can discuss that.
Mr. Chairman?
Yes.
And the only other thing I would say about the 2 carts is when we first rolled out the larger carts, we heard a lot of complaints about the size of them, fitting in garages. Now we're going to put a second cart in there with the HOAs.
Well, not cart.
What?
Well, it would be another thing.
Right, and the HOAs don't allow them outside, so that brings up another problem for someone who doesn't have that space. That's the only other consideration.
All right. So, do you have any kind of direction on this, Mr. Cobb, or do you need a little?
Everybody
bit more
is hoping for
direction?
something different.
Well, let's see if I understand correctly. Let's get, John, if you could go back to this slide.
Yep.
The graph.
Got it. Yep, we'll just go through it. Yep.
The consensus is that on the first bullet, yes, we need to look at processing only, collection only, and bundle.
Yes.
Correct.
In that we would maintain, as far as refuge, yard waste, and bulky, we'll maintain status quo, 1 time per week. Yard waste, refuge, and then bulky waste will be the same. Call ahead, make it, schedule an appointment. On the bear issue, we'll go in. We'll look at doing a bid process for bear carts, and then it'll be a personal decision with the property owners. But we can provide at least that mechanism for the lowest price. I know you've found some things that possibly you can do as well. That goes with smell. And,
How did you know that? That's exactly.
I have a wonderful assistant city manager. And if we go to the next slide.
And back to that one though, real quick. And for the bear cards, just to make sure that we have the language in the RFP that states
Right.
that there's not a charge.
Yes.
Okay.
And if we can go to the next slide. My understanding is, the only thing I'm worried about is, I think I hear you correctly, you're good with options, us testing options 1, 2, and 4. It's option 3 that I'm not hearing a consensus on. And so I need to understand if you want, because I think I heard some of you aren't really liking the alternative weekly collection. And so I guess it's
Really,
option
really
three
love it.
Okay.
Can we at least consider
so-
that in one form?
So who here is in favor of option 3?
Can that be included anyway?
I mean,
we can always consider it, right?
We can test it.
Yeah.
Is that a
Yeah,
problem to do it, though?
I would say, right, at this point, there's not a lot of risk to include it. If it comes back and it's really favorable, I'd love to sit in on that discussion.
I mean, that's been the thing. I mean, you all sound exactly like Mr. Wyatt and myself when we were sitting there talking about, oh goodness, what if we do go back to dual stream? Because we remembered what happened when we went to single stream. And I've still got 6 of those little things in my garage. We also, when John mentioned every other week, I mean, I'm sitting there thinking, goodness gracious, I fill up that blue can every Thursday. It's full. But then when he said alternating, I'm like, they're going to get confused. They're not going to go. But then we started thinking about, okay, well, at the time of the discussions, we said, well, if we introduce a bear cart, then we could take it could be brown. In our existing cart, green cart, that could be cardboard. And the blue cart could still be plastics and tins and things like that. But then we started thinking about, well, not everybody really needs a bear cart. And not everybody may want to, there might, like you said, the Bear Cliffs are a cheaper alternative. Some folks store their carts in their home. They don't need it. And so we went through that same thing. Will they get confused by going paper this week, tin this week? You know, what will happen? But then there's always if it's a third big cart that you're putting out, this cart this week, this cart next week, is there room in the garage?
Or just put them all out every week, and they'll just pick up whichever one they're supposed to pick up. It's cool.
All right. Okay, so it sounds like you've got a consensus for all the, exploring all the options.
Okay.
So what else do you need?
One of the things that wasn't in the slides, but one of the things that we briefly touched upon, right now, what we've been talking about is our residential service. And it's exclusive residential service, and they also provide the service to the city. That's the supplemental things that John was talking about. But the other thing one of the things we talked a little bit about was with our commercial accounts. And right now, basically, it's up to the individual business to go secure their own service, and we have franchise agreements with each of the services, and they pay us a franchise fee. We didn't really discuss it in great detail, but something that I wanted to ask you is, do you want to go to an exclusive, bring the commercial side into this, or just keep them separately like we have them now?
I'm interested in having the same person do it all, because that seems like it would create some more fuel efficiency, just as like in the world at large. So we don't have 8 haulers doing routes all over the place.
Well, correct me if I'm wrong, they're different trucks for the dumpsters versus the...
They are, but then they would be going to, similar to residential, they'd be going up and down every street and handling all the businesses versus, different people going to one business here and then a different truck goes to that. You get what I'm saying? Mm-hmm. If it's a different hauler. But I do like free enterprise and all that good stuff. But it does seem like there is some cost savings where if it were awarded to one hauler, that the residential side may benefit from it.
I'm okay with leaving them separate. I don't. What's everybody else's?
I don't see that it, for a commercial business, I don't see it's the city's proper, to be able to say you have to use this hauler to haul your garbage out. I think it's up to the business.
I kind of agree with that.
Okay.
I think for now, we're going to have our hands full with the residential. I think it's, I wouldn't want to complex the process when they have commercial.
Okay.
Yeah, the recycling is going to be a challenge. I think we all recognize that. So. Okay.
Is there any benefit at all from your perspective to merging them to the same hauler, or not so much?
I do, just to be fair, that has not been a topic that we've discussed. So I'm hesitant to opine too extensively on that. I guess just very briefly, because we have looked at that, and so I do have some direct awareness of some of the issues. When you have multiple commercial haulers, you've got multiple trucks going down the street, so there is sort of an environmental impact. Candidly, the cities that we've worked for have found with multiple non-exclusive franchise holders that can just create a management and enforcement challenge, because you can have non-franchise folks come in. It's hard to monitor that. In fact, I would say that's been the driver for other local government clients that have asked us to look at going from a non-exclusive to an exclusive system. They're not so much swayed by lower air emissions and lower truck traffic as they are. We just can't administer 9 haulers driving around our city. We can't enforce it and keep track of it and audit the books and everything else. So I think those are the issues. My observation has been commercial collection has largely in Florida and across the nation has been much more the free market. It's been much more of a free market service. It just hasn't been the domain of local government. So those are both sides of that. And again, we have not been asked to look at that. So I hope that was acceptable. I hope I haven't undermined anything Mr. Cobb or Mr. Wyatt wanted to discuss. So.
And from our perspective,
Nobody kicked me under the table anyway. So.
And I think it's okay to say this, is that we've been able to manage, I think we've got 13. We've got 13 individual contracts here in the city. The hardest one to get was the one for the school district, but we got it. And all the cities banded together, so put pressure on them. But we've been able to keep it largely under control, so it hasn't been an issue for us here.
I believe we get 9%.
Right. So we get a pretty good franchise fee out of it.
Okay. All right, so it sounds like the consensus is to cross that bridge another day.
Right. Okay, let's get on to this slide. I'm not really sure what you want to do here. Do you want to keep glass in or take it out?
Take it out? Sounds like it's wish cycling. Is that correct? At this point?
At the moment, if you stay dual stream, if you stay, really, that recommendation would only apply staying single stream. If you convert to dual stream, then glass is in Seminole County's program and would continue to be, and that's really not an issue. So I don't think I said that. The takeaway is that's primarily an issue if you stay single stream, because it's the single stream processors that don't like the glass. And I think the second takeaway is that's probably not going to move the pricing needle very much. It might a little bit. Honestly, I'm somewhat interested because I think it's a straightforward thing to build into the RFP process. There's no risk. You don't have to commit either way going ahead. And we might learn something. I suspect that's not going to be a huge decision point.
And can I ask you a question too? Also, if Seminole County were to handle the glass, again, one thing I heard last August was, again, that contamination. Mm-hmm. If the donation is not pristine, that they don't take it. So would that be a problem?
If glass, usually glass is the contaminant. It's not so much that if you forget to empty it's like glass itself. But are you talking about the contents of?
Well, yeah. I mean, people because they wanted it clean. They wanted the labels taken off. They wanted them washed.
The conventional wisdom here in Florida and in most parts of the country is really if the best glass recycling is if you can color sort clear, green, amber. That's just not possible in single stream processing, and candidly, that's probably not possible just on a large scale. There are some areas of the country where entrepreneurial glass recovery operations have come in and set up drop-offs, kind of a big blanket drop-off system, but that's been typically at a larger scale than what the city of Oviedo would do. That would be if Seminole County implemented a glass drop-off program. That is probably the scale you need. Probably that's hard for a city. So, again, that's a pretty low impact recommendation, maybe more of a professional interest. I don't think, don't get me wrong, the processing community would love to drop glass. And I actually even think, I maybe should be careful, but some of the haulers have started to subtly remove glass from their list of recycling. They're not saying it's not recyclable, right? It hasn't moved over to the we don't want your glass, it's just gone down to we're not going to mention that we're taking glass. But the reality is glass is in all the contracts at the moment in Central Florida. And because of the weight, it's very attractive for meeting recycling goals to keep glass in recycling. Again, I suspect it's not going away, but that would be the first candidate to go away if, for whatever reason, dynamics changed.
So, John, in that recommendation, is it that we would, as part of the RFP, we would ask them to give us a price with glass and a price without glass?
I think so. This applies only to the single stream options. And I don't know if we would put a line item and they enter a number, or we would say, please provide details. We could leave it open. We could leave it very rigid, or we could leave it open-ended, saying, please describe any, discounts or, other adjustments that you would give, or the city to exclude glass from its single stream program. So it only apply to two of the alternatives.
Now, in the Seminole County program, the cost to recycle the glasses and bottles and stuff, isn't that less than the cost for normal garbage?
It's probably pretty comparable. You might pay a little bit more processing, but then the Seminole County pays a material revenue comes back. So, in other words, there's a cost to sort everything, but then when you sell it you sell the cardboard, you sell the aluminum, the revenue comes back.
the interlocal agreement has paying some of the processing, but then sharing in the revenue. So some of those terms are spelled out in interlocal.
So it's actually, it would be advantageous from $1 per ton to leave it in the recycling if you had dual stream.
Yeah.
Right. If you go dual stream in Seminole County, you would leave it in the dual stream program.
Okay.
Absolutely, yeah.
So, all right. All right, so, Councilman Chudnow?
No, I agree. If it's, look at it on the single stream, there's no question on the dual stream. It's just a single stream, whether excluding glass would be cost effective for us or not.
Okay.
Yeah.
All right. Councilman Britton?
I'm kind of still in the single stream mode, but, I want to wait and see what we get.
Okay. All right. Councilwoman Smith, did you have anything else to add?
No, I think you said they were going to ask for costs for both. For the single stream, if we delete the glass.
Yeah, I think I was, concerned that we have clients in some parts of the country that under no circumstances will you remove glass because that gets our recycling rate up. So we get different local values, and I don't know what I'm going to get. So it was possible that you might say, oh, no, we're never going to drop glass. We got to have glass because I got to have a recycling rate up. But I think I'm hearing, let's go ahead and test both. And that seems pretty straightforward in the RFP process and probably isn't going to change a whole lot, but we might learn something.
Mayor Slater?
Good.
Okay. All right.
And then, of course, the last bullet, as far as unit pricing for the supplemental services, I'd be inclined, I'd like to see it, because I know that was one of the Republic complaints. If we didn't have to do all this free stuff for you guys, it wouldn't cost us so much. But it's one of those things, too, I think that as far as us, when we're negotiating a contract, those are services that we can definitely ask for.
Mm-hmm.
But knowing what the price impact would be important.
Is everybody okay with that? All right. Is that enough direction?
Perfect.
All right. All right. So I think, anybody else have anything else on this? All right.
I got to extend a sincere kudos to all of you for getting through all of that detail. So thank you so much.
I love those charts. That was awesome. I pulled them out. I don't know if you saw me over here. Like, I'm keeping these 3 pages.
All right, so moving. Thank you so much. We'll move on to the next item. Actually, the next 2 items were put on the agenda they were both items that I had asked for. So I think the easiest for these items is I'll just kind of start. Mr. Cobb can I add to it, and then we can have a discussion on them. The first item was the delegation of authority to the city manager. I had asked about this because I think that it would be easier to delegate some of the administrative functions, signing some of the different contracts and stuff that are approved by council to just maintain a timely and efficient process. I don't want to overstep any of the charter, so I just, we need to be, make sure that we don't overstep that. The mayor does have some items that she is by charter to sign, but I think that this would just help with a more efficient process. They've already come to council; they've already been approved. I don't even know if we wanted to go as far as just getting a stamp by the city attorney on them, on the contracts that that he's reviewed them. But other than that, just kind of move forward that way. The reason I brought this up was there was an instance, I don't know, it was about 3 or 4 months ago, and the mayor was out of town. I was leaving just to go up the road, but I came in because they needed a document signed. Came in to sign the document, and at that particular time, when I was signing the document, it had to do with something for public safety. The police officer came in, and there was another document that needed to be signed. If I would have left, it probably would have had to wait till the following Monday to get signed, and so it would have delayed. And he was under a time crunch. So I think for, to make it more efficient, I think that there should be some things that we could delegate to the city manager to sign. So that's my thoughts. Mr. Cobb, did you have anything else to add to that?
No, that's it. If you look at the list that's provided in there, these are things that, development orders, development that you all approve, development agreements, grant applications and grant agreements with, with the state, those types of things. I did take the opportunity to do a cleanup, and as far as the purchasing side of things, where council had increased the city manager's authority to $50,000, I did throw that in there so that we could get that cleaned up at the same time. Facility use agreements with our for recreation, that our agreements with Babe Ruth, Little League, Florida Creek Fresh. I tried to look at it the same way as the deputy mayor, looking for things that once you've granted that approval, I can take it and implement it. Now, I will say interlocal agreements. I believe that the chief elected official, as the state calls the mayor, should be the one executing those types of agreements. I believe that. And so that's why those aren't in there. But I think things that, these are operationally that if you say, yes, we're good with it, I can take over and go. So that's what, as far as the types of things that we've recommended in the list. That's one of the things, yes. This all came about because one of my predecessors and the city attorney had an engagement regarding who could sign what. And the part of the charter that says that the council can delegate to the city manager, that's what this standard operating procedure became. It became that mechanism that if council decided, yes, we want to delegate this to the city manager, we would put it in this standard operating procedure. So, that's how that all came about. But I did take a look at, as far as what I thought, recommending things that there are things that the mayor needs to sign.
Correct.
Ordinances. You need to sign ordinances, resolutions, actions of the council, agreements with other local governments as interlocal agreements. I think that's vitally important. But, if we get a grant agreement, if you approve that grant agreement, I can go, those types of things.
Sign away. It doesn't hurt my feelings one bit.
So I think this is a good list. If we, that's the nice thing about the program that we have. If we come up with something new, we can always add it to it.
Right.
So, but this was the list so far that I felt comfortable with.
All right. Does anybody have any other comments on it?
No, I'm fine with the way that it was revised.
Okay. All right. Got your direction there?
Yes, sir. I'll bring it
All right.
forward.
All righty. All right, the next item, this one somewhat goes hand in hand with the other one to a certain degree when it comes to expenditures and approvals. I asked about this one. This one has to do with I asked about this one because we have to take, or an item has to come to council sometimes multiple times. The budget gets approved, and then the actual expenditure then comes to us to get approved that's already been budgeted. And then, the thresholds for the city manager, the threshold's $50,000, and then the percent, then for any change orders, there's a percent threshold. So a lot of times if the dollar amount is low, then the percent threshold triggers it, and then it has to come to council. So we were approving things for very low dollar amounts that were on the council agenda because they were change orders that met the percent threshold. One of the things that I've seen is that to possibly increase the city manager's approval to limit some of these items from even having to come to council. One of the numbers I was throwing out was 100,000 because just the cost of everything is increased from when the 50,000 number got implemented. And then for change orders, it would be change orders that reach up to that council threshold again. So if so you would have, let's say the city manager or the council approved something for 100,000, and then there was change orders going up into that, then the city manager could approve those change orders. And obviously, the city manager, would use their discretion too on, do I need to bring this to council or not? But those are my thoughts on this. And then there were some other cleanup items on here, but those were my recommendations. They're not quite in these policies here, but like changing in the if you read the agenda item here, instead of saying city council or city manager for 50,000 above, I would just say change the dollar range. I'm thinking 100,000, but something maybe above 50,000 for the city manager, and then going to city council, and then for the section that talks about the change orders, just basically leaving it to going back to the threshold, the dollar amounts, and taking out the percentages altogether. So those are my thoughts. Mr. Cobb, did you have anything to add to that?
No, sir, I didn't.
Okay. Any discussion, or what kind of discussion?
Excuse me, what threshold were you using? What dollar amount are you?
I was using up to 100,000. That was my thought. But I think that 50,000 can be a little low, especially with a lot of the items that are coming before, especially especially with public works and stuff like that. It's just a lot of items coming to the council, and the issue is there's almost a month lag time from when, and this is without a bidding process.
Mm-hmm.
There's like a month lag time from when the item is requested to hitting the city council, but going through the whole agenda process.
Mm-hmm.
So, and then if there's a bidding process to where we couldn't use another contract,
Mm-hmm.
then we have all that time for the whole bidding process as well. So from the time that the item is needed, it could be up to 2 months before the council even sees it to approve it. So I'm trying to limit that gap a little bit and trying to create some efficiencies by increasing that threshold so that the city can operate a little bit more efficiently.
Can I ask Mr. Cobb?
Yes.
Mr. Cobb, Mr. Pollock has threw out a figure of 100,000. In your opinion, what would make your job easier? Is that amount to your?
Well, that's a lot of flexibility.
Is that?
I guess one of the things, I did have a question. Are we looking to, I know on the first page we talk about the purchasing threshold, but then we get over on the second page of the memorandum and we're talking about budgeted items. If it's budgeted, is there, I just want to make sure I understand, if it's a budgeted item, let's say that budgeted item is greater than $100,000, would we take that to council if it's greater than $100,000, or because it's been budgeted, you've approved the budget with the city manager, then have that authority up to the funding amount? I want to make sure I understand.
That's another way of looking at it. If we budgeted it and it's greater than, or whatever that number is that's been budgeted, then I think that's a good way of doing it as well. To where we could just, if it's budgeted for that, then you have the authority. Mr. Chudna?
From
Councilman.
working that process from the staff side, which I've had 10 years of doing, at times, you're right, it's approved in the budget, we start the purchasing process, then by the time it gets on the agenda item and it could be 2 months, when sometimes when you're ordering something, you get behind because other agencies, and I'll just use squad cars as an example, other agencies are ordering those, so when your order gets done back here, you're waiting longer for those items. From my perspective, if the city council approved the budget, they've already approved the purchase of that item because it's laid out in the capital, and it's been approved. So to bring it back to council to expect to make that expenditure that we've already approved seems redundant.
Okay. Yeah, I agree. I agree.
Is that where a lot of the consent items come from?
Yes, ma'am.
Okay.
Yes, ma'am. That's probably, I would say, the majority of the consent items are expenditure approvals. We've gone through the process, and so we've selected award bids, and so because the threshold is above the city manager's threshold, then we place it on the agenda. As the deputy mayor said, when we get to, we have a percentage on our change orders. If we trip that percentage, that goes on there. You could hit that really easy on a $3,000 purchase. Yes, they do that. But that was one of the things that, on page 2 of your memo, that's one of the things that we talk about, is that as long as we're working within the budget that you've given us, then what that would say is that we can move forward with the purchase and expenditure following the process, as far as what requires a formal bid, what doesn't require a formal bid. As long as we follow that process, as long as we're within budget, then we can move forward. The second that we start, it's not budgeted. If there's a budget amendment required, then obviously that's got to come back to council, because council did not approve that. If it's something that's come up, it's an emergency thing where we have to make a decision. Well, we had these things budgeted, but this emergency came up and we need to pay for it. We know it's not in the budget. So, yes, we would get that on the council agenda immediately and say, we got to amend the budget to shift the monies to pay for this. So that would be the idea behind that type of system. I'm comfortable, I've been comfortable with the $50,000. So yes, the $100,000 gives me a lot of flexibility on a number of issues. Being able to, I know feedback from the directors, they look at it from the same light, that they put it in the budget for funding. We try to be as specific as we can, and council's approved that purchase. By approving the budget, the council approved the purchase, and that's how they feel. And they would love the opportunity to be able just to move forward with the purchasing process, and as long as we stay within budget.
That's the key. Stay within budget.
To me, that brings a high level of accountability. That you've got to stay within your budget.
Yeah.
You can't. That's a high level of accountability.
And it not only from that aspect, but the time and staff savings it will save for the staff to, you have it, reviewed by the directors, the city manager, the assistant city manager. Everybody's reviewing this whole agenda package going through as well, and they could be working on other things in that process. I think there's just a lot more efficiency in that process.
But I guess the takeaway from it is that council will have already approved.
Correct.
So it's not like we're in the blind.
Correct.
We know what we've approved, and it's.
Well, that's the thing. I feel like we don't typically know what we've approved because we have these strange buckets in the budget book, and it doesn't say like you're approving, squad cars. Like I've never seen that in the budget. So if there's a way to elaborate on the budget, so we do feel like there's transparency all the way through, then if you stay within it, that's cool. But right now, I don't know where that.
Well, items like squad car are in the budget. They're in the capital improvement.
Yes.
Because all those go through the capital improvement.
I think
That gets approved.
that's probably the biggest difference. There is a greater detail in the capital
Yes.
program than there is in the operating program. When you're talking about supplies and things like that, there's not great detail in the budget book regarding that. But in the capital program, it is. It's
very detailed.
It's very detailed.
So could we maybe limit this to things that are in the capital plan, capital improvement
We
plan?
could, if that's the direction, we can do it, yes.
I'd feel more comfortable with that just because it is very specific. And the other stuff, what are the odds of having a paper overrun? But
If we're talking about approving something that's in the budget for let's just say resurfacing in that portion of the budget, and we're doing a piggyback, legal's already looked at it because they're not going to say we can do it if that piggyback doesn't meet the legal standpoint. So if it meets the legal standpoint and it's in the threshold of the city manager, we've already approved the money for resurfacing. So whether that contract comes back, again, sometimes it's the timing. If we only have one item, is one meeting in the month, like March or December, then those things don't get done until January or April. And sometimes those things, the longer we wait, the more money it costs us.
Councilman Britton?
Well, I think we do a pretty good job of staying within the budget that we approve, this big book that we look at. And then I like to break it down into two things that we vote on. One is procurements. It's a contract. It is what it is. And the other is projects, like road resurfacing or something, where if we have a budget and we go out on contract and we have a contingency on top of that budget, that's where I see Brian should have the leeway to work up to the approved amount of that budget. And I think I wrote in my email, maybe up to 90% of the total budget approved. And then when you get in that last 10%, I'd like to know we're getting to that threshold so we could do something about it and we're not surprised about it. And give us a report that says, here's what we've got left and here's what we think we're going to have to spend, and whether that's within the budget or not. But I think for procurements, we very rarely do we get a contract back for more other than a capital project. The budget itself, I think we do a pretty good job every year. I don't want to tie our hands between one bucket and another, because we may overrun one bucket and have to steal from the other one that's way underrun. And I want to have staff to have the flexibility to do that, and I think they do that in the prospectus, don't they, Brian?
Yes, sir.
The transfers. I want to keep that flexibility, but I would like the insight to know if we've got a big $500,000, $1 million project that's coming up to the maximum amount that we approved, that we know about it ahead of time. And I guess you guys weren't here when that happened on some of the road projects.
Yes.
You get a $300,000 or $400,000 change order that's already been awarded and we haven't approved it.
Right. I was on the outside looking in on those.
Yeah.
So that's one of the things I think in this, I'm going to have to rely on you all, on your direction, because I didn't live through those. I was off in development services land at that time, and my biggest expenditures were to do the evaluation and appraisal report once every 5 years, and so I didn't have large expenditures.
If you want the
like
history,
that.
I think there were two incidences, both of them road projects. One was on Oviedo in the park, I don't know if it was Oviedo Boulevard.
Yes.
And we finished the project, and here comes a $100,000 ad that no one knew about. It wasn't budgeted, wasn't anything. And they said, well, here it is. We did it and paid for it. And the other one was Lockwood Boulevard. We somehow underestimated the amount of asphalt we needed and kept on telling them to go put more asphalt. And here comes a couple $100,000 bill.
Yeah, I think it's around 400-some thousand.
Yeah, and without any approval or,
Right.
Unlawful commitments is what they call it in the federal government. We committed to this company to pay for it. I don't think we really had to. We did because it was the right thing to do, but that's what started this oversight.
Right.
So,
And we also, one of my predecessors was assumed authority, I guess you might say, and was approving things that I would normally bring to council. And it was just my practice. But he decided that there was just things that, like I said, assumed authority.
it was a painful process.
It was, and like I said, I had to watch it from the sidelines, and I thought to myself, I'd never want to go through that. But and that was when I believe the limits were set at 35,000.
I have no objection to 50,000. I have no objection to 100,000, but I'd like to see something that comes back that gives us, eyes on the prize, so to say, that we're performing within the parameters we set.
Okay. All right, Councilwoman Smith, do you have anything to add?
Nothing additional other than that.
Yeah, 100,000 just seems really big, and it would tinker with whether we do 3 written quotes or the formal solicitation. Would 75,000 cramp your style too much? Or, I mean, that's uncramping your style by 50%. Is that something workable? Is that something you guys are comfortable with? That the formal solicitation angle does seem like it's important once you get to, that some people, that's more than they make in a year. It seems reasonable to do formal solicitation.
Am I misunderstanding?
Well, I think that,
This is the procurement procedure.
but the procurement, maybe I'm...
Are you not wanting to shuffle that too? You're just doing the...
Well, what I'm thinking is that the procurement procedure, if it's budgeted and it goes through the procurement process and it was a budgeted item, does it need to come to council?
It does on a consent agenda, doesn't it, normally?
Right now, yes, sir.
But that's a pass, that's letting us know what amount we're paying.
I may not be understanding what I'm looking at.
Well, let me see if I can help you. There's two parts to the purchasing process. One is the dollar thresholds, and the dollar thresholds they do two things. The type of process, do you go get quotes or is it formal? But then there's also the second part of it is, okay, who approves it? And so you could set up. We could keep the
Keep that
quote
part the
bidding
same.
the same, yes.
Okay.
And then create a new thresholds for who approves it.
So there are currently, in the red line version, is there language addressing that exactly? Because
Well,
I'm not seeing the number
I think what-
100,000 or any, I'm
Well,
not seeing a
that's-
number.
No, that was something I was...
Okay. I was like, I'm looking for this number in
We're
here.
not changing that, are we?
The
The procurement.
Bidding process or...
Well, that's the thing. That's why that's how when I was
Okay, so I was
listening to the mayor,
trying to figure out, are they
was-
connected?
I think I don't think Mr. Pollock's looking for changes to what we get bid quotes or formal solicitations. I think what Mr. Pollock's looking at is the approval authority side of it, increasing the dollar threshold for the approval authority. We can keep the as far as whether we get quotes or whether we get solicitations, we can keep that the same. That's not a problem. I think where you were talking about was looking on that approval authority column to try to, like I said, either one, increase the dollar value for the city manager to move forward, or like on the second page, look at something that's, okay, it's been approved in the budget. As long as the city manager stays within the budget, then he's okay. But if he, like you said, if he gets within 90% of the budget, then you need to come to council and let them know whether or not we're going to go over or not go over, that sort of thing. So I think yes, we can accomplish what you want by leaving the thresholds as far as what when we obtain a quote or when we go for formal situation. We can leave that alone.
Okay, good.
Okay, and then what we can concentrate on is the approval authority, who approves what, when. At what threshold are you comfortable with city manager being the approving authority, and what threshold do you feel like where we need to come to you? I think that's really the big question.
So do we want to, going off Councilman Britton's suggestion, do we want to say up to 90% of budget? And then if it's greater than 90% of budget, then it needs to come to council.
Okay.
Well, that's aggregate, not a single version, but...
The aggregate, yeah, for that.
10 changes and you've bumped up to that 90%, then come see us.
Well, so let me make sure I understand it. Let's say that I've got a budget of $100,000, and so as long as my costs, and that would be purchase plus any type of change, doesn't exceed $90,000, I'm good. But the minute that the cost plus any changes exceeds the $90,000, goes to $90,000 and a penny, then I need to put that onto the council agenda.
Correct.
Right?
Does that sound reasonable?
Yes.
Does that tie your hands, Mr. Cobb?
No, ma'am. Actually, that gives me a lot of a lot of flexibility. It
Putting a lot on your shoulders,
it
too.
puts a lot of, yes, it puts a lot of pressure on me, I'll say that. But to me, that's part of what a city manager should be doing. And I am a check and balance. I'm the first check and balance. You all are the second check and balance. And I mean, I'm the one that's constantly asking questions. Sometimes a department will forget to send it through finance to make sure, to do that double check. And I get it, I look at it, I don't see the finance sign off. I take it back downstairs, you guys look at this first and then bring it to me. So it's something that I'm already doing. I'm already looking at the budget. I'm already looking the detailed memorandums that I get on these things, especially when there is a change order. They know what I'm looking for. They know that I've often told the staff, assume I don't know anything, and so they've got to really go to the extra limit to explain it. And so, but that's how I look at it. I'm the first line of check and balance, and then you all are the second.
Does that sound good? Don't prove us wrong.
Well, I can tell you this. I tell Mr. Boop every day he's not allowed to retire. So, I'm going to nail him to the chair. But yes, I can say that we can live within those parameters.
Okay. So that you've got your direction on how to kind of write that.
This one, the delegation of authority to the city manager, that's an easy one. We can flip that around pretty quick. This one, we may have to take a little time on this one because we've got you're touching multiple documents here, so we got to make sure that we create that consistency among the different documents.
Okay.
And everything. So this one might take a little bit longer to bring back to you.
And probably, going off these lines, we probably may have more questions during the budget session, on more detail to make sure that we know exactly what we're approving when we approve the budget, because that's kind of our approval, our big approval. So, anybody else have anything else on this one? No? All right, and the last item on the agenda, this was brought by Mayor Sladik. So, Madam Mayor, you want to take it?
Well, y'all have had a couple of months to check it out, or at least 6 weeks. It pretty much is just kicking this back a little bit closer to Robert's Rules of Order, protect the minority voice. If you have any questions about why some of this stuff is in there, I'd be glad to answer my thoughts on what inspired it, but we already talked about that a little bit back in December.
Who wants to kick it off?
I can.
Okay, Councilman Chudnow.
For the first, changing mayor to presiding officer, I have no issue with. But that's what the charter says, so that's what that should say. On the second one about the consent agenda, my concern with that one is that would give the ability for any member to pull everything on the consent agenda at every meeting.
Correct. That's how it is at most collegial bodies.
I have a problem with that.
Why?
Well, number one, when you're talking about an item to purchase toilet paper, does that need to be pulled?
But so you think that somebody in bad faith would pull it just to be a stinker and make the meetings long? Is that the concern?
Could be. I've written and analyzed policy for 35 years. I've analyzed policies for extremely large police agencies, like as much as Las Vegas, and I know one thing: if it's written, it can happen. And that's my concern with this, that it can give someone that ability to pull everything, a consent agenda that's 15 items long, pull every single item.
You realize that it could still be pulled, every single item, if a member of the public comes and asks for each item to be pulled individually.
Mayor Sladik, can we let him finish,
Okay,
and then
yeah.
and you can come back to you.
I just don't agree with it.
Okay.
for that reason, I think items need to be pulled for specific reasons, not just to be pulled. And this gives that option for a member to pull an item, all the items, all the time.
All right. Do you have anything else on the document?
Yeah, the other one I have concerned about is dealing with the discussion items. To bring up something to discuss at one meeting with no one else knowing anything about that discussion item does not give the other members a chance to learn about it, do their own research. So it then becomes not much of a discussion item if I don't know what that discussion item is going to be ahead of time. It gives me no background. It gives me no opportunity to learn about it, whether it's a good idea, whether I agree with it, whether it's asking me to discuss something on that moment that I may have little knowledge of to start with.
Well, the inspiration for that, if I could, is because the current policy says that you can't even have a discussion item if 3 people don't want to hear about it. So if you pre-decide that you don't want to hear about it before it's discussed, then that you never get an opportunity to hear the other person's perspective about why it should be discussed. So that was...
But if an item is brought up for discussion and I have no knowledge of that topic ahead of time, how do I prepare for that discussion?
Well, the discussion item would then be on the agenda, and there would be supporting materials that you could read in advance. Sort of like, this is my effort at an olive branch here, in anticipation that under the provisions of the charter, anybody could be made the chairman. I went ahead and amended this to reflect what our charter says.
Right, but the way a council member bringing up a discussion item without previous consensus by the entire council, then I would like to know ahead of time what we're going to discuss, because then I can learn about it.
Well, then could it be you bring it up at reports, and even if there is no consensus, you can discuss it anyway at a meeting later?
Something I know nothing about ahead of time.
Well, that's what I'm saying. You bring it up at reports, the previous meeting, then it can be a discussion item the next meeting. The way it is now, if you bring something up at report and there's not 3 people who agree that it can then become a discussion item, it dies.
Yeah, I think the current process is that it's brought up, the subject is brought up in a report and requested to be a discussion item on a future agenda. But it requires consensus to put that discussion item on a future agenda. So if it's something that the majority of council does not find necessary or whatever it may be, then it never gets to that discussion item on the next agenda. It just dies there in the report.
Right. I guess what I don't want to happen, that I'm concerned about, is that having that discussion item brought up for discussion at that meeting.
Right, okay, understood.
Because
Yeah,
that's not fair to the other members, regardless who brings it up.
right, I agree, and I think the last meeting, a couple items kind of went that direction, and I don't think the intent was, it was for future meetings, but...
Now, if it's brought up for discussion at a future meeting, that's fine, but to discuss that item at that time, I don't think it's fair to the other members.
Okay. But we still have to get back to, if a member wants to bring it up for discussion, do we want to have a consensus of council, which is what the current rules state, or do we want to allow anybody to talk or to state it in the report, and then it shows up as a discussion item on a future meeting? That's the question.
Brian, what's the process? Is that, the way it works, it comes up during reports, and then we have consensus whether it goes forward to a discussion item, or
We may bring it for a work session, like tonight. One of the things that I've noticed that, actually, this is one, I probably shouldn't say this, I'm shooting myself in the foot. This is one of the areas where actually the city manager has more flexibility than the city council. If I decide on my own that I need to have a discussion item, I can place it on the agenda. However, a council member has to bring it up at some point during the meeting, and then has to have consensus of the council to have a discussion item. I guess the assumption is that if I'm going to bring it up, then it's got to be important. But yeah, you've given the city manager way more flexibility than you've given yourselves.
you know, I'm trying to reconcile how we take a discussion item and go forward. If we bring it up in a report and no one wants to hear about it, it doesn't go anywhere. If we bring it up in a report and it goes on the discussion item and no one wants to hear about it, there's not consensus, it dies then. So I'm not sure when in the process it's appropriate to bring up a discussion item.
Well,
Or maybe the process is to go through you.
Well, that was one of the things that I was going to, I just made a note to myself, what would be my suggestion. My suggestion would be one of two things. Either make me follow the same rules that you all have under my report, say, council, I need to have a discussion with you at the next meeting. Or have you all go through me and then say that the mayor had an item that she would like to talk about, and she would contact me, and then I would look at what's the next available agenda that I could place that item on. Or if Councilman Chudnell had an issue that he felt needed to have a discussion, it gives us the opportunity to talk and decide, is it a discussion item at a council meeting, or is it a work session type issue that we need to sit around the table and discuss, and then I bring it back, later. That's probably the commonality right there, is that no matter what we do, if it's a discussion item at a meeting where it's competing for time with many other items, or if it's a work session item, I'm still coming back again with a formal request for decision, unless, of course, y'all say, no, I don't want to do that. So I think probably the easiest thing is that you could set it up. The easiest thing would be just having you work through me to place it on the agenda.
Well, my whole concern is just not having a discussion item brought up
At
that
that
evening,
meeting.
at that
Right.
meeting, and then having to discuss it.
Right.
right.
As long as there's ample time to learn about the discussion item, have that research if there's needed any.
One of the practices that I know Mr. Seaver used to do, he would say, I was contacted by council member so-and-so, and I've placed this on the agenda. That's when, or I've placed this on the agenda at the request of council member so-and-so. And then the mayor or the chairman at the time could sit there and say, okay, we have a discussion item. This was brought up by Councilwoman Smith. Why don't you go ahead, sort of like what we did tonight, why don't you go ahead and lead us off? That can work. And that way, I think we create some equality between the procedures, but then also we give the information to you ahead of time. We address that concern as well, that we're agendizing it. I used a Lonnie term, that's not a Brian term. We put it on the agenda, so you've been able to see it ahead of time, and you know who has the concern. I don't know if that would work for you or not. Or have me follow the same rules that you all do. That if I've got something that needs to be discussed, then y'all can tell me whether or not you want to.
Councilwoman?
I have a question for Mr. Cobb.
Yes, ma'am.
Putting you on the spot again. If we place you in that position where, if I have a concern and I want you to place it on the agenda, do you feel comfortable doing that? Because I don't know. I don't know if we're just kind of putting you in the middle, or.
Let's look at it from this standpoint. Anytime that we're seeking guidance, coming to you as the legislative making body, and we need that guidance from you, then as long as it's something as that from that standpoint of seeking guidance, I'm very comfortable. If you want me to pick a side, that's where we could. We might have to have a conversation before we even put it on the agenda, because I may not always agree, with it. But the thing about it is that if it's something that the council as a body, if it's something that they want to take on, then we need to move forward. So, just as far as that's concerned, I think I wouldn't have a problem with it.
And I guess it gives it some order. I guess I'm looking for order.
Right.
I think that would give it order. That would seems fair. I don't know how you. That if we do have something we'd like to place on the agenda,
Correct.
we'd be given that opportunity to, and also give supporting documentation for whatever we want to discuss, so everybody has a chance to look at it.
And if it, and quite frankly, if it's something that's in the police field, I'm going to delegate it to the police chief. If it's something in fire, I'll delegate it to the fire chief, so that you're getting that expert commentary, based on their experiences. I feel like I can speak intelligently in each of those worlds. I've walked among them for many years, but I'm no expert in them, and so I always like to pull in that expertise, So I'll always be asking for help when it comes to those types of things. But seeking guidance, seeking direction, I think that's more.
Councilman, did you have anything else to add?
Yeah, as far as public input at work sessions, for me, the work session is for us to discuss things. And if someone has a comment, we have emails, we have voicemails, there's the regular meetings they can come to. I kind of view these work sessions for us to toss things around, and there's plenty of other ways the public can get a hold of us. They can, before a work session, they can give those items, call you or call another council member and bring those concerns up. So that's just my opinion, that I don't think there needs to be that portion in a work session.
All right.
My 2 cents on that is, I don't think it needs to happen at every work session, but a lot of times, in the past at least, I've heard members of council say, well, and now you guys have a problem with XYZ. You had so many chances at all these work sessions to speak up, or maybe a meeting here and there. So for like the streetlight fee, that's probably the biggest example. There were a lot of work sessions on it, but nobody had an opportunity to speak. And granted, nobody really showed up either. But in limited situations, I thought it seemed sensible to leave open the opportunity to, as we selectively choose to include the public, to open up the possibility that they could, versus here where they simply cannot. But it would be something that would be decided by council at or before the work session by consensus.
For me, that gives I don't know, maybe not, maybe not. For me, it's a work session for us. And if someone comes to work something, hears something, because there's no
There's no formal action
happening here. So if there is someone doesn't like, has input in it, there's ample time before the next meeting for them to contact us.
All right. Councilman Britton.
Let's see. I see 7 items here. Editing the grammar, change mayor to chairman. That's just a clarification as far as I can tell. I think the consent agenda process, there's more discussion that needs to be had on that. I think we're making progress. Modifying the discussion item portion of the agenda. I'm not sure what that actually means versus number 2.
I think you're kind of mixing them up. One is whether you can remove consent agenda items on the spot, and the other is the discussion item. I think the discussion item portion is more generous than I was even hoping for.
Okay, is that the agenda? Brian, was that voted in the charter amendment?
No, sir.
No?
These are all just our rules, I believe, too.
One thing, Councilman Britton, your iPad doesn't, if you look at the attachment in your iPad, it doesn't show you the actual changes.
No,
So that's why we have that here on the table.
It's going on the memo.
I told the others earlier that,
Yeah, I got...
okay,
attachment.
we've got the attachment 2 there for you.
Okay, yeah, let me get it straight. Consent agenda items, you know, frankly, it is to kind of curtail abuse of the process. Someone can come in and take anything off, and it becomes onerous. So it's usually out of professional courtesy. If someone wants to pull it off, there's no issue. If it becomes abusive, then it becomes an issue. So more to talk on that one as far as I'm concerned. The discussion item, I think we're going to talk about that some more. Allowing the public to speak at work sessions, I kind of agree with Councilman Chudnow, but I think if we wanted someone to speak at a work session, by consensus, we can do that already, as far as I'm concerned. Especially if it's already on the agenda, and we approve it on the agenda for someone to speak.
Well, yeah, that would be a different thing. But
These are informational, these are not decisional meetings, so it's for us to put our receivers on and get information from staff or consultants. And there is a forum for public input afterwards, at a later date, usually if it goes forward. You know, I'm not sure that one, I'm not objecting to it, but I'm not sure we need to do that as a rule. Changing the release dates of agenda, Brian, we talked about this. I'm okay with what I get, but I can understand it'd be nice to have it a little bit earlier. I think we're working on a new software package to make that happen.
Yes, sir. That's one of the things is that it's something that I've been working on for a while. When you're dealing with only 2 meetings a month, it's not an issue. It's when you get into 3 meetings a month or possibly 4, it can get onerous. We have a new agenda software. We're working on implementing a new agenda software. We almost have the purchasing process completed on it. The new agenda software has a workflow system inside of it, and so it would be very easy to implement the council on Monday, public on Wednesday process, working through that workflow system rather than trying to retrofit this old system that we've been doing. It also gives us an opportunity as part of the training process of the new software, and we can build that in the beginning. Start that with the ground
I
running.
think you'll have that online.
I'm not sure. There were some things, some legal things that we're
That sounds
working
like a
through.
good project for Patrick.
Patrick is actually the lead on it, to be honest with you. And so there's some things we're working through in the purchasing side, but we're very close. But it is something, yes, I would rather you all have more time to look at it, public have more time to look at it. It would be, I can't do it exactly right now. And it would be easier for me to phase it in with the implementation of the new software. So that would be my request to you on that, is to, if we could let me do it as part of that process, it would make it much easier.
Add language suggesting that presenters are discouraged from reading words verbatim from previous. I put no for that one because if it's a public comment thing, that's what they're allowed to do. If a presenter gets up there and reads to me something I've already read, I'm going to tell him he's wasting my time and he can sit down if it's in one of these forums. I don't like to read charts or have someone read charts to me that I can already read. So I think we have the capability to shut that valve off if it gets to be out of control. And then removes requirement that council members notify the rest of council of their actions before any public commitment to an event. I say no to that too, because I go to all kinds of places and I say what's on my mind, and I don't think I need permission to do it.
Well,
I'm not going to represent
That's,
council.
well, that's what the proposal is, to let you keep on doing that, because I think we're all doing that anyway, and just representing our own selves, but we're not asking anybody's
As long as we
permission.
don't sell ourselves as representing the council or the position of the city, I say what I want anyway.
so that would be a yes to that one then, because currently, the way it reads,
We're not
I've
supposed to.
We're not
I've never
supposed-
obeyed that rule.
right,
I don't think anybody has.
right, yeah, okay.
And it's okay, because I think we're all representing our own independent thoughts.
Okay.
I think that came about because at one time there was a member of council that was out speaking.
Wanted to go door to door and
Well, they were,
talk to folks.
no, yeah, but they were out giving their opinion as that of the council. And it made, it caused a real struggle amongst the council. Yeah. Before I was city manager, sir, I was still in development services land.
All right. Did you have anything else to add, Councilman Britton?
No.
Councilwoman Smith?
I should have been,
Oh. I just want to make sure everybody,
I guess I like what Mr. Britton was saying, and also if changing the chairman verbiage, changing the mayor to the chairman, that makes sense. And also, I acquiesce to Mr. Cobb at this time and wait for the software to come online in order to be able to get the reports earlier. That would be great. But if it's easier once the new software comes online, and I'm all for that, waiting for that new software. I think that's it.
okay, the two big ones are the discussion items and the consent agenda items. I think those are the ones that we're trying to get some sort of a consensus or discussion on, so.
But I thought with the consent, with the discussion items, well, maybe we hadn't agreed that Mr. Cobb agreed to allow us, if we had a item for discussion, that we go to Mr. Cobb, and Mr. Cobb would place it on the agenda?
Yeah.
I thought we had consensus for that.
Did we have consensus for that? Is that?
He would place it on the discussion, so we
Through
can all
him,
have
okay.
time to,
And know about it ahead of time.
Okay.
right.
Yeah.
no
I
problem.
wasn't sure if we had gotten consensus on that one.
Right.
Okay. I'll go, and then I can come back to you for any further discussion. So, obviously, the changing the mayor to presiding officer, that I don't have any issues with doing that. That's more of a just a correction in it. I don't agree with having public comments at work sessions, because it's for us to have our discussions. I think that the next public meeting, the next council meeting, if someone really objected to something that was going on at the work session, they could come to that meeting and speak at the public portion of that when the floor is open. I hear what you're saying, but I think that it can. This is our time to just kind of have an open discussion, and that's why we have these work sessions like this. As for the consent agenda items, my thought on it is we have a discussion for the consent agenda. So if there's items that need to be further discussed or talked about, that's the time to discuss them. If it's something that one council member is just adamant that they're just opposed to, I don't want there to be a situation where there's a lot of unicorns and rainbows on the agenda, and there's that one item, and they got to vote against it all because they don't want that one item. But I don't know how to word that so that if there's a and we usually have a, kind of a professional courtesy for that. So I don't know if we leave it the same, but I also don't want somebody to not have the ability to remove that one item that they're opposed to. So I don't, that one's a little tricky for me. I don't know how to make it so that it's, how to get it to where it's just,
There's greater chance for abuse leaving it how it is than putting it how Robert's Rule says. Right now, I am the one who had to vote against the rainbows and unicorns because there were things that I was not allowed to remove from the consent agenda. And nobody else, I was unable to find any other collegial body where, as a matter of right, a person who sits on that body cannot remove something from the consent agenda for the purpose of voting no.
okay. Well, let me finish with my comments, and then we can discuss it a little bit further. So that's my big struggle there. And then the whole notification to council on outside items, I think we just addressed that. I think that we're okay with kind of removing that. I know that we just need to make sure that if we do go to outside events, that we are representing ourselves, and we need to make sure that it's clear that we're representing ourselves and not representing the council. I think, and I don't know if we have to have a little disclaimer or what, but just to make sure that people clearly understand that we're one of 5 individuals, and we're not speaking on behalf of the other 4. And let's see, the release dates, I'm fine with waiting till the agenda software gets implemented, and then we can back that up a little bit. The discussion items that we already agreed, I believe, on the discussion items will go through the city manager and to be put on onto a future agenda, which he can manage the time on those agendas. And as for the presenters for presentations and putting stuff verbatim, I'm okay with leaving it the way it is. If like you said, if they start reading everything word for word, then we cut them off. So with that, I think the kind of the last item that we really have is just getting an item off the consent agenda. And the other thing is that we follow our rules, and they aren't exactly Robert's rules, and they never have been exactly Robert's rules. So from that standpoint, we can get close, but these are still our rules, and we set our rules as a council. So I'll turn it back over to you on the discussion items, if you the consent agenda.
I think you've got some thoughts.
Okay.
Could I pose rather than focus on what's in here for right now, the thing that I've been looking at and trying to come up, okay, what would happen if we got to a point where we can't figure something out? And the purpose of the consent agenda is for what the city attorney calls those ministerial items, the purchasing items. I know council, when we do proclamations and things that are for outside groups, we throw that on consent as well. And we throw the architectural design orders, and I try to look at it myself, try to vet it and say, its importance. But one of the things that in observing you in how we deal with the consent agenda, the thing that I look at, and I don't know if it's supposed to be this way or not, but when we do a consent agenda and we make a motion, if you think about the structure of a motion, you make a motion, whether it's to adopt or what have you. But then there's discussion of the motion. Now, the thing about it is, in the other parts of the agenda, you make the motion and it's on a single topic. But in this case, you make a motion, it might be on 10 to 15 topics. And the thing that I got to thinking about was if you followed the same process that you do on a single topic motion, such that if you said, okay, let's say that the mayor made the motion to adopt, and let's say that Councilwoman Smith seconded, and then you would say, okay, Mayor, you have it. And she would say, I have questions on items 4, 5, and 6. It would seem to me that it would be more efficient for her to address her questions, have staff come up and address the questions, rather than pulling it off and having a formal presentation and go through all that. Because you could ask your questions, staff could answer the questions, and then you could still be. It's
Don't
still
we already do that?
It's still part of the discussion. Well, not really. We don't go that far, but it's still part of that discussion. If we're able to address the questions, as you go down the line, and if anybody had a question on any other items, and we're able to answer them sufficiently, then you could go forward with, and you could do your motion. If you get to the end of the line, you know how you all, is everybody good? Ready to go? I'll call the vote. If we haven't, then that's at that point. If we haven't been able to address the questions, then at that point we should pull it off and go a little bit further. Have a formal presentation to you, that sort of thing.
I think we do that already. And maybe not to the extent you're describing. But
Right.
If there's a simple question or for clarification, we can get that.
So, but that's my thought, is that if you get through the questions, if you give each member the opportunity to ask the questions on the individual items, if we can't answer them, just in that format, and that should be a signal to everybody, hey, this needs greater scrutiny. We need to pull this off and really dive deep into it.
Now, usually when I read the consent agenda and I have questions, I'll just call you.
Oh, that's right.
Well, yeah, ahead of time, I would expect everybody to do that.
Yeah.
Well, the only reason I've ever wanted to pull anything off the consent agenda was for the purpose of voting no.
Yeah, we've done that. Maybe it's water on the bridge, but maybe we need to be.
Well, yeah, but it needs to be it's something that a right that should be protected without the person having to. And if it's necessary to spike the audience with somebody to come and pull it off the consent agenda, that can be done. Whatever the rules are, we can make it happen. But
Right, and I would think within the framework of that motion that it would behoove a member to say, I cannot support this right now. And it would behoove you to do that and to state why, so that the others know this is something that this isn't going to get a unanimous vote. And but I think you can work. Like I said, I don't think it's written what I'm talking about. It's not written that way. But I would think you could work within the framework of your motion and still accomplish.
to approve the consent agenda except item number 3.
You could.
Or yeah.
Why not just say that you can pull something off the consent agenda? It's just blowing my mind that this would even be something that people would resist. I don't understand.
I've never had anyone deny me the ability to take something off the consent agenda.
I have, more than once.
Well, Mr. Chairman.
So maybe we need to be sensitive to that. Maybe it's not a problem.
Councilwoman?
May I ask a question? And you may not be able to answer, but I'm just asking a question. You, excuse me, you get together the consent agenda.
Yes.
Once we get our packet and we look over the consent agenda, and if we have a problem with the consent agenda, and if we come to you and ask about consent agenda number 1, I've got a problem with it. We state the specific problem. What do you do at that point? Is it a matter of negotiation at that point that we could effect whether number 1 stays on the consent agenda or your consent agenda stays until it comes before council?
I would say it's the latter, that it stays on the agenda, because by the time when you've gotten it, it's already out there, and so I wouldn't be able to change it, rearrange it.
But can you, as far as the agenda is concerned, but if we voice a concern about something, okay, you're going to either answer the question or not, or
Right.
Or explain it more, or send us to staff, and they'll explain to to us what it is.
Right.
And if we still have a problem with it, then we do what you say.
Right.
See, I can't agree with that. Is that, I mean, that sounds reasonable to me because I go over I've only had 2 meetings, but I go over it. If I have
Right.
a problem with something, I'm going to come to you and ask you, what is this?
Exactly.
And if I really have a problem with it, then I'll express my, really deep concerns and then deal with it in council.
One of the things I don't think we've ever used, quite honestly, a number of agencies do this, is that before they start, they approve the agenda. And you could...
That's a fascinating possibility.
You could...
Swap it around on the spot?
Well, you could always do, before you begin your business, you could always do a motion to amend the agenda.
It's so much simpler just to change this one thing and say, if somebody wants to remove it, you can.
The same thing could happen.
Yes, it could.
Well,
It very well could.
I
But
think
even
that-
still, you're defeating the purpose of what I think is, as far as the request to change, you're defeating the purpose of trying to get the consensus of everybody to take it off.
Well, I think that there's, the consent agenda, I think the way that this was written or the reason this was written this way was to keep the meeting moving in a timely fashion, because there are individuals that don't like consent agendas at all.
Just put a time limit then, or figure out a way to allow somebody who wants to vote no on an item to do it.
Because
Like, you can only talk 2 minutes. If you want to pull something from the consent agenda, more power to you. You got 2 minutes to bellyache, and then move on.
Councilman Chudnow?
If I'm reading this correctly, if a council member wishes an item on the consent agenda to be discussed, that member shall request that the item be removed from the consent agenda, should the item be removed. And again, not going back what's happened in the past, but it says it should be requested, and if it's removed, and I'll go back, and if you leave it the way it is, and those items that are requested to be removed are removed, then everything is copacetic.
Yes.
So my suggestion would be right now is let's leave it the way it is. Should there be a problem, we can come back and readdress it.
Well, that would leaves me in a position to, at all times, have somebody in the audience ready to remove anything from the consent agenda that I may object to, for fear of not getting 3 people to agree to allow me to remove it. You get what I'm saying?
I hear what you're saying, but think positive about us.
I'm trying.
We're new council, and I'd like to think that we're going to really work together. And so...
Well, by the same
because we
token...
disagree on whether we want to remove that or not. There's no reflection on you. It's just our opinion.
But think positive that I wouldn't abuse it, or that none of us would abuse
Well,
it.
it's not that, because we're looking at this for future use also. It's not just about now. So I have to say, just leave it like it is, and I hope to be able to work with all of you all in a very nice manner, and we move forward. We don't think about the past. As Chief Councilman,
That's quite all right.
I mean, the past is the past, and we're just going to move forward. And should you decide to place someone in the audience to do that, I guess that's your prerogative. But I think we can work together. Let's I'm a different person on the council. You may have worked with these gentlemen before, but let's move forward and see what we can do. Let's do it. We can. Let's blot out the past. From now on, clean slate. Let's move
Okay,
forward.
hopefully whoever's in the audience won't ever be necessary.
Well, we can't do
But
that.
the thing is, I won't know.
Where do you read that about the audience?
The audience, that's what Mr. Groot told me after multiple times being put in this situation. He said, you just got to plant somebody in the audience. But the problem with that is public comments comes before the consent agenda, so the person would have to come, and I would have to, in bad faith, sort of, anticipating that I'd be shot down.
Well, we're not going to anticipate that.
Well, but if I don't anticipate it, then I'm left in the position where I may have to say,
if
vote
it happens
no
one
to
time,
you.
then you know to go to plan 2. Then, but right now, we're going forward. We are moving forward in a positive manner, and we're going to work together.
All right,
We
minority
are-
views not being held up in this.
Go with Plan 2.
But that's after something bad happens.
No,
to go to Plan 2.
No, well, bad things happen.
It happened more than
And
once.
then we recover.
All right, so I think...
So
I
there's
think
no
we've got
consensus
the-
for that.
Okay, so I think we, do you have direction on everything else?
Let's see. Presiding officer, you make those, and honestly, I would use the word presiding officer than chairman. I know I put chairman in here. I think we use presiding officer. Stick with what the term of the chart. Discussion items, we'll work through the city manager, and that way we can get them agendized. And let's see, let me make sure that, okay. At one time, there was a grumbling that we had too many discussion items, and I think there was a direction to a city manager, no more than 3. But we
don't want to have.
can look at, we'll look at the load. That's like I said, the best available agenda. We can look at the load and see where we are. Work sessions, your preference is that unless the item necessitates it, that this is a discussion amongst the council. So we probably just leave that alone. And the standards of conduct, you're okay with the change on standards of conduct.
Yes.
And then on the consent agenda, we'll just leave it, we won't make the change.
Okay. Does that sound reasonable?
Yep.
All right. All right. That's the last item. Does anybody else have anything for the good of the order? All
Now
right.
let's talk about work session. I'm going on my 16th hour of the day. You guys have been here 3 hours. Do we need to have a 3-hour work session? Can we put a time limit on the number of agenda items and the time we spend here?
Let's talk about that another time. It's
Yeah.
late.
Okay. Well,
This is long.
This one was a bit different, because I think with the 3 policy things, we had them all hit in December, and we had a whole month, in between, which if it had been on months where we had the 2 regular meetings, we probably would have spaced them out a little bit better.
I'm only saying this because, at least in my opinion, we're more effective with work sessions when they're limited topics and they're short and sweet.
Right.
And you ask for direction, we give it to you.
Yeah,
I'm a little bit worn out right now. I don't know about the rest of you.
the RFP, that was my big one. And that's why I put it first, because I needed that one. That was time sensitive. But the other 3, yes, I did put them on here because, well, we heard about it a month ago.
Plus the fact the game starts in 5 minutes.
Okay.
okay. All right. Anybody else have anything? All right. Meeting's adjourned at 8:50.